Welcome, dear friends, to a gentle journey through the fantastical world of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, a tale of powerful stands, boundless adventure, and unforgettable characters that has captivated generations of fans. From the legendary bloodline of the Joestar family to the twists and turns of fate that shape their destinies, we will explore the many bizarre adventures that span across time and space. Tonight, we will gently drift through the lore of this extraordinary series, from the birth of Jonathan Joestar and the rise of Dio Brando, to the vibrant streets of Morio and the complex journey of Giorno. Each chapter of this epic story offers a world of imagination where every stand is a manifestation of the soul's deepest desires, and each battle is a test of willpower and heart. As you settle in, let your breath slow and feel the weight of the world melt away. Picture the calm ebb and flow of the journey ahead, where time itself bends and twists in the most delightful and strange ways. The world of JoJo is vast and wild, but here in this moment, it is a place of peace, waiting to welcome you. Take a deep breath in and out. Let the tension of the day slip from your shoulders, your body softening with each exhale. You are safe here, in this quiet space, where all you need to do is listen and drift into the rhythms of a story that has inspired millions. And if you find yourself enjoying this peaceful voyage through JoJo's world, feel free to subscribe and softly share where you're listening from tonight. Now, let us begin the tale of Jonathan Joestar and his first fateful encounter with the mysterious Dio Brando. In the quiet, mist-covered hills of England, where the air carries the weight of ancient secrets, a story begins, one that will stretch across generations, across time itself. This is the story of the Joestar family, whose legacy would become intertwined with battles beyond imagination, powers that defy logic, and a curse that echoes through the ages. But before all of that, it begins with a young boy named Jonathan Joestar. Jonathan Joestar, or JoJo as he would later come to be known, was born into privilege. The Joestar family estate stood as a symbol of wealth and power. Yet Jonathan's life was to be defined not by the wealth that surrounded him, but by the forces of fate, violence, and destiny that he could not control. As a child, Jonathan was innocent, his heart pure, his mind curious, ever eager to explore the world around him. But it was the arrival of Dio Brando that would forever alter the course of his life. Dio, a boy from a humble, troubled background, came into Jonathan's life like a storm, sudden, violent, and without mercy. Adopted into the Joestar family under tragic circumstances, Dio's presence cast a long shadow over Jonathan's world. Where Jonathan had known warmth, comfort, and love, Dio brought with him a coldness, a hunger for power, and a burning desire to claim what was not his. The relationship between Jonathan and Dio began as one of rivalry, but beneath that rivalry lay something darker. Dio's jealousy burned bright, and he saw Jonathan's good nature and the affection the Joestar family had for him as obstacles to his own ambition. In time, Dio's envy turned to malice, and with each passing day, he would weave a web of deception, slowly twisting Jonathan's world. But Jonathan was not one to bend easily. The strength of his heart, the very thing Dio despised, would be the thing that carried him through the trials that awaited. And then came the stone mask, an artifact of ancient, forbidden power whose origins were shrouded in mystery. It was in this mask that Dio found the key to his unholy ambitions. The mask, forged in the dark corners of history, had the power to transform anyone who wore it, granting them unimaginable strength, but at a great cost. This was the beginning of Dio's descent into madness, and the moment that would begin the transformation of the Joestar legacy. One fateful night, Dio, driven by his insatiable thirst for power, placed the stone mask upon his face, and in doing so, became something no longer human. A creature of darkness, his body transformed into something beyond the natural world, and he was reborn into an immortal, ruthless being. It was here, in the cold darkness of that moment, that Dio embraced his true nature, casting aside any remnants of humanity he might have once had. But Jonathan, though naive, was not without his own strength. He had something that Dio lacked, a heart full of determination and love for those around him. It was this heart that would guide him on a journey that would take him far beyond the reaches of his home in England. As the clash between Jonathan and Dio grew inevitable, Jonathan would have to face the unimaginable, the impossible, and the bizarre. The teachings of the Ripple, or Haman, would become Jonathan's greatest weapon in his battle against Dio's supernatural powers. A technique passed down through the ages, the Ripple allowed its users to harness the energy of the sun, using it to heal wounds, strike down evil, and ultimately to defeat forces of darkness. Jonathan, under the guidance of the noble Will A. Zeppeli, began to learn the ways of the Ripple, training his body and mind to harness its power. The training was grueling, exhausting, but Jonathan, despite his many doubts and struggles, never gave up. With every passing day, his body grew stronger, his mind sharper, and his resolve firmer. The Ripple was not just a technique, it was a way of life. It was about connecting with the world around you, understanding the flow of life, and finding strength not just within, but in harmony with the world. And in that quiet harmony, Jonathan found the power to face the darkness that Dio had brought into his life. The first major confrontation between Jonathan and Dio came when Dio, now a powerful vampire, unleashed a wave of terror upon the Joestar estate. His newfound powers allowed him to control the undead, to bend the very fabric of life and death to his will. Jonathan, aided by his friends and allies, Speedwagon, Zeppeli, and the others, took up the fight, determined to protect his family and the legacy of the Joestar name. It was a battle that would see the young JoJo face unimaginable horrors, but also one that would forge him into a hero. In the darkness of that battle, Jonathan's heart shone through, pure, unyielding, and determined. Though the odds seemed insurmountable, Jonathan did not falter. He fought with everything he had, knowing that the future of his family and the world rested upon his shoulders. And yet Dio's cruelty knew no bounds. In his quest for ultimate power, Dio left behind a wake of destruction and heartbreak, forcing Jonathan to confront his darkest fears and deepest sorrows. Every victory was hard won, every step forward marred by loss. But Jonathan was steadfast in his mission. No matter what Dio threw at him, no matter how many allies fell, Jonathan pressed forward, always fighting, always hoping. In the end, it was not just strength that won the battle, but the strength of spirit. Jonathan's unwavering determination, his courage in the face of insurmountable odds, was what ultimately led him to victory. The final battle, a clash of wills, was fierce and unrelenting. But with the power of the Ripple and the strength of his heart, Jonathan was able to strike the final blow against Dio ending his reign of terror. But even in victory, there was a price. The world had been forever changed, and the Joestar family's legacy would never be the same. Jonathan's story, though tragic in its loss, was one of triumph, a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome even the greatest of evils. And though the darkness of Dio would one day return, Jonathan's legacy would live on, passed down through the generations, awaiting the next hero who would rise to face the bizarre and unpredictable world that lay ahead. In the quiet hours after Jonathan's first great trials, when the world seemed to exhale in a soft sigh of relief, another journey slowly began to unfold, one woven through whispers of sunlight, ancient traditions, and the gentle rhythm of breath itself. This was the story of the ripple, or Hammon, a mystical art that would become the pulse of Jonathan's awakening and a guiding thread in the Joestar legacy. It was a power born from life, rooted in harmony, shining with warmth in places where darkness tried to settle. And for Jonathan, whose heart had always leaned toward kindness, it felt like stepping into a truth that had been waiting for him all along. Jonathan's encounter with Wille Zeppeli marked the beginning of this path. Zeppeli, with his calm eyes and a presence shaped by sorrow and wisdom, arrived not as a warrior fueled by vengeance, but as a teacher who understood the quiet weight of destiny. When Zeppeli first approached Jonathan, there was a hush in the air, as if the world itself were listening. He saw in Jonathan something rare, an innocence that had not broken despite grief, a strength that rose gently rather than violently, and a spirit capable of carrying the light of the ripple into the battles ahead. And so, under Zeppeli's guidance, Jonathan began to discover the layers of power hidden within his breath. The training itself was unlike anything Jonathan had ever imagined. It was not about brute strength or striking with anger. Instead, it began with stillness, with breath, with the idea that the body is a vessel for sunlight and the breath is the bridge that brings it forth. Zeppeli taught Jonathan how to inhale deeply, filling his lungs with warmth, and exhale slowly, letting the energy travel through his very fingertips. This was the essence of the ripple, the gentle, life-filled current that mirrored the rhythm of nature itself. Jonathan practiced by the riverside, watching the ripples on the water mirror the ripples within his own body, learning how each breath could become a wave of energy. There were moments of struggle, moments when Jonathan doubted himself, moments when the trauma of Dio's cruelty pressed heavily on his mind. But Zeppeli's calm voice always brought him back. "The ripple is the light that remains," he would say softly. "It is the reminder that even in darkness, the sun continues to rise." These words, spoken with quiet certainty, stayed with Jonathan through every challenge that followed. As Jonathan grew more attuned to the ripple's flow, he discovered that it was not simply a technique, it was a philosophy. It required patience, empathy, and the gentle strength of someone who fights not out of anger, but out of love. And Jonathan, whose heart held deep wells of compassion, found himself aligning naturally with its teachings. He learned how to let the ripple surge through his body, granting him the power to heal wounds, shatter stone, and confront the supernatural forces Dio had unleashed upon the world. With each passing day, Jonathan's connection to the ripple deepened. He could feel it in the warmth of the morning sun, in the still air before dusk, in the soft vibration of his muscles as he trained. The ripple became a part of him, a quiet companion reminding him that his strength did not come from rage, but from the gentle certainty that he must protect those he loved. Even when doubt clouded his thoughts, the ripple grounded him, reminding him that power is most pure when guided by kindness. During this time, Jonathan's bond with Robert E.O. Speedwagon grew as well. Speedwagon, who had once been a street thug, now became one of Jonathan's most loyal allies. He watched Jonathan's training with awe, marveling at the way this noble young man embraced each hardship with humility. Speedwagon had never known someone like Jonathan, someone who could endure loss without becoming bitter, who could face cruelty without losing his tenderness. In Jonathan's example, Speedwagon found a new purpose: to follow him, to support him, and to help protect the future that Jonathan fought so hard to preserve. Together, Jonathan, Zeppeli, and Speedwagon journeyed across quiet villages and misty landscapes, following the trail of Dio's spreading influence. Each place they visited bore marks of the unnatural. Towns whispered of strange figures in the night. Families mourned loved ones who had vanished without a trace. The air itself felt heavy, as if waiting for something terrible to unfold. And yet, despite the growing unease, Jonathan walked forward calmly, carrying with him the gentle light of the ripple. One of the most profound lessons Jonathan learned during this period came when Zeppeli shared his own tragic past. Zeppeli spoke not with bitterness, but with a quiet ache, recounting how his family had been destroyed by the stone mask. He explained how he had devoted his life to mastering the ripple in the hope of ending the mask's influence forever. Jonathan listened with deep empathy, feeling the sorrow that shaped his teacher's gentle strength. And in hearing this story, Jonathan's resolve became even firmer. He understood, more clearly than ever, that the ripple was not merely a tool, it was a responsibility. The three travelers faced many dangers along their journey. Undead creatures lurked in abandoned buildings, their forms twisted by Dio's power. Ancient caverns revealed horrors that seemed carved from nightmares. Yet Jonathan approached each challenge with quiet bravery, allowing the ripple to flow through his movements like warm sunlight cutting through shadows. Every battle tested his resolve, but each victory strengthened his connection to the ancient art he had embraced. A turning point came when Jonathan finally began to feel the ripple, not just in moments of battle, but in moments of stillness. While resting beneath a quiet tree one evening, he noticed the breeze brushing gently across his skin. He noticed the soft glow of the fading sun, and in that peaceful moment, he felt the ripple in every breath he took. It was then he realized that the ripple was not something he summoned. It was something he lived. It connected him to the world around him, to the people he cared for, and to the destiny he had been chosen to face. As their journey drew them closer to Dio's growing power, Jonathan stood taller, his heart steady. He no longer carried fear in his chest. He carried purpose. He carried warmth. He carried the knowledge that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, there would always be light, and that he, with the ripple flowing through his veins, could be a vessel of that light. The phantom blood era was shifting toward its next chapter, and Jonathan, with his allies at his side, stepped forward with quiet determination. The road ahead was uncertain, shadowed by the specter of Dio's growing influence, but Jonathan's spirit was calm. Each breath he took shimmered with the warmth of the ripple. Each step carried him closer to his destiny, and in the soft unfolding of night, the Joestar legacy continued to grow. There are moments in the long tapestry of the Joestar legacy where the past does not simply echo, it returns. Quiet at first, like a faint vibration beneath the earth, and then stronger, rising with a slow, inevitable pull. Dio Brando was one such return, a shadow that refused to fade, a presence that lingered even when the world believed it had buried him beneath the sea. And so, as years drifted forward like pale petals on a river, a new era began to stir, one not shaped by the ripple's golden warmth, but by a strange, mysterious energy that would soon come to define the future, the power of stands. Decades had passed since Jonathan Joestar's final, heartbreaking battle with Dio. The world had changed, cities had risen, time had softened the memories of that terrible conflict. Yet beneath the calm surface of everyday life, something ancient and terrible began to awaken. Far out at sea, in the depths where light rarely touched, a coffin rested, silent, unmoving, forgotten by nearly everyone. But inside that coffin lay an evil that time could not erode. Dio, having fused his existence with Jonathan's stolen body, remained alive in the dark quiet of the ocean floor. He waited, patient as the tide, as though he knew the moment of return would come. Then, one day, that coffin was lifted. Whether by fate, chance, or something deeper pulling strings beneath reality, the seal of the past was broken. The moment Dio touched the air again, a pulse went out, an invisible tremor that spread across oceans and continents, reaching those who carried the Joestar blood. It was not a sound, not a light, but a sensation that curled quietly within their spirits. Something had awakened, something had shifted, and the future of the Joestar line was about to change forever. Young Jotaro Kujo, the newest Joestar descendant, felt this shift without understanding it. He was a calm presence despite his youth, carrying himself with the quiet heaviness of someone who sensed more than he spoke. Yet one day, in the stillness of an ordinary afternoon, something strange appeared beside him. A figure that was not flesh, not shadow, but something in between. Invisible to most, yet undeniably real. It mirrored him in spirit, standing with a silent, protective force. At first, Jotaro resisted it, unable to understand what this strange companion was, but it remained with him, unyielding, a guardian embodied in form, but born from the soul. This was the birth of stand powers, abilities shaped not by breath, as the ripple had been, but by will, emotion, and inner strength. A stand was an echo of the heart, a manifestation of a person's hidden essence. And for Jotaro, who carried both the Joestar bloodline and a quiet storm within, his stand took the form of a powerful figure with impossible speed and precision, something that would later be known as Star Platinum. It was the beginning of a new chapter in the Joestar story, one where battles would no longer be fought with the warmth of sunlight, but with the unseen radiance of the spirit. But with this awakening came danger. Jotaro's mother, Holy, a gentle soul whose heart brimmed with kindness, also developed a stand. Yet her spirit, too soft and too peaceful to control such power, began to weaken under its presence. The stand, instead of obeying her, overwhelmed her fragile body, placing her in the quiet shadow of a slow decline. The doctors could not understand it. There were no wounds, no illnesses, only a deep fatigue that pulled her further into stillness each day. At this moment, Joseph Joestar, now older yet still sharp, arrived in Japan. He understood, with the quiet shock of someone recognizing a long feared truth, that Holy's stand was not a random occurrence, but the consequence of Dio's return. The reawakening of this ancient enemy had caused the bloodline to react, summoning stand abilities in those connected to Jonathan's stolen body. And if Dio continued to grow in power, these manifestations would only become stronger and more dangerous. Thus began the gentle unraveling of a journey shaped by urgency, but still wrapped in the softness of destiny. Joseph explained to Jotaro that their stands were not curses, but signs, signs that Dio had risen from the depths once more. To save Holy, they needed to find Dio. They needed to confront the shadow that had haunted their family for generations. The stand was the key to this confrontation, and though it came with uncertainty, it also carried hope. A stand, after all, was the reflection of the soul, and Jotaro's soul was strong. Quietly, the group began to form. Joseph, weathered but wise. Avdol, calm and composed. His stand, magician's red, glowing with warmth like a flame held in cupped hands. And Jotaro, with star platinum standing silently at his side like a vigilant guardian. Together, they prepared to journey across continents, tracing the faint threads that connected the Joestar family to their ancient enemy. Every heartbeat carried the weight of generations. Every breath carried the soft echo of Jonathan's strength. As they traveled, they encountered others whose stands revealed their inner worlds. Kakyoin, whose emerald-spun stand moved with grace. Polnareff, driven by loyalty and gentle sorrow, accompanied by a knightly spirit of his own. Each of them joined the journey for their own reasons, yet found themselves woven into the Joestar mission. And through each new stand user, Jotaro learned that stands were not merely powers, they were extensions of the heart, each shaped by emotion, memory, and longing. In quiet moments between battles, Jotaro would sometimes watch Star Platinum move with subtle, deliberate gentleness. The stand's form was powerful, but Jotaro could feel a softness beneath it, a protective instinct, a calm loyalty, a quiet echo of something noble. Perhaps it was the Joestar bloodline. Perhaps it was Jonathan's spirit, still lingering within the family's legacy. Whatever it was, it brought comfort, like a hand resting softly on the shoulder, reminding him he was not alone. And beneath all of this, in a distant place shrouded in quiet darkness, Dio moved with slow, deliberate purpose. His presence stretched like a shadow across the earth, faint but unmistakable. The bond with Jonathan's stolen body linked him to the Joestar line, and through that link, he could feel the awakening of stand powers, both a threat and a promise. The world had changed while he slept, but Dio's ambition remained untouched, still sharp, still cold, still waiting. Thus, the dawn of stand powers marked the beginning of a new era for the Joestars, an era where the visible and invisible intertwined, where spirit walked beside flesh, and where destiny pulled gently on the threads of fate. The world was shifting again, and the Joestar family, guided by quiet courage, stepped forward into the mystery. There are moments in every generation of the Joestar bloodline when a quiet strength rises, a strength not born from pride or anger, but from an unspoken sense of responsibility that lingers gently in the heart. For Jotaro Kujo, this strength did not announce itself loudly. It emerged slowly, like dawn spilling softly over the horizon, illuminating parts of his spirit he had not fully understood until the day his stand awakened. It was the beginning of a new era, one shaped not by ancient masks or the warmth of the ripple, but by an inner force that stood beside him like a silent guardian. Jotaro's early days with Star Platinum were filled with confusion, resistance, and a kind of restless unease that comes when a person discovers a side of themselves they never expected. He was calm by nature, thoughtful even in silence, but the sudden appearance of a powerful figure only he could fully sense left him unsettled. Star Platinum hovered like a shadow, reacting to Jotaro's subconscious, protecting him even when he did not ask for protection. And while this unseen force was frightening at first, there was something comforting in its presence too, something steady, something loyal. At school, at home, even in quiet moments alone, Jotaro felt the stand's awareness. It was as if another heartbeat pulsed gently beside his own. He sometimes lifted his hand without thinking, watching Star Platinum mirror the motion with perfect clarity. There was beauty in that symmetry, a delicate connection that felt both familiar and new. Jotaro didn't speak of it often, but inside, a part of him recognized that this presence was not an intruder. It was an extension of his own spirit, shaped by a strength he had always possessed, even before he understood it. His mother, Holy, saw this too. She saw not the sharp features or stern expression the world often noticed, but the softness beneath, the tenderness he rarely allowed to show. She had always known that her son loved deeply, even if he expressed it quietly, through small gestures rather than words. And as she watched his stand linger protectively near him, she sensed that this power reflected the same gentle loyalty she had seen in him since childhood. But Holy's own stand had awakened as well, and unlike Jotaro's, hers did not bring strength. It brought exhaustion, a slow, draining heaviness that began to seep into her days, pulling her toward a quiet, dangerous stillness. The stand's presence overwhelmed her kind spirit, unable to harmonize with a nature so gentle it refused even to defend itself. Jotaro watched his mother's decline with an ache he tried to hide but could not fully bury. It was this silent fear for Holy's life that sharpened his resolve. When Joseph Joestar arrived in Japan and explained the truth that Dio had returned and that Holy's fading strength was a result of this reawakening, Jotaro understood with calm certainty what he needed to do. He could not turn away. He could not remain still. The bond between Dio and the Joestar bloodline meant that Holy's survival depended on stopping Dio once and for all. And though Jotaro rarely spoke of his emotions, the love he held for his mother shaped his decision with unmistakable clarity. He would go. He would fight. He would face whatever darkness lay ahead. Thus began the gentle shaping of Jotaro into the next JoJo, not through ceremony or prophecy, but through quiet acceptance of a burden he carried with quiet dignity. His stand, Star Platinum, reflected his evolving spirit. It stood tall, precise, focused, yet beneath its power there was stillness, like a deep lake untouched by wind. This stillness became Jotaro's anchor. When uncertainty rose, he centered himself in the stand's unwavering presence. When danger approached, Star Platinum reacted with a speed that felt almost like intuition, as if it understood Jotaro's heart before Jotaro could even form a thought. As Jotaro joined Joseph and Avdol, the small group began to take shape with gentle purpose. Joseph, though older, still carried the same spark that had guided him through his own adventures. Avdol brought a calm wisdom, his flame-like stand glowing softly with controlled warmth. And between them stood Jotaro, quiet and steady, the newest carrier of the Joestar legacy. Together, they would travel across distant lands, seeking the source of Dio's rebirth and the mysteries surrounding the bloodline's reflective awakening. During the early stages of their journey, Jotaro continued to learn more about his stand. In moments of danger, Star Platinum displayed remarkable precision, grasping objects with delicate care, moving with speed so sharp it seemed to cut the air, striking with controlled intensity that balanced power and grace. Yet it was in the quieter moments, when the world was calm and the night sky held only distant stars, that Jotaro felt the deeper truth of his stand. It was not simply a tool, it was a companion, one shaped by his inner strength, one that mirrored the tenderness he rarely revealed, one that understood him even when he said nothing at all. Polnareff and Kakyoin would soon join them, each carrying stands that reflected their own hearts. Their presence shifted the harmony of the group, adding new textures to the journey. Kakyoin's calm intellect and Polnareff's emotional openness contrasted beautifully with Jotaro's quiet stoicism, creating a balance that felt almost fated. The more time they spent together, the more Jotaro's gentle connection to others quietly blossomed. Though he rarely expressed emotion outwardly, his companions came to understand his kindness through actions rather than words. When he fought to protect. When he stepped forward for others. This was how Jotaro cared. The journey to Egypt was long, shaped by new encounters and rising challenges. Each stand user they met revealed new facets of this strange, spiritual world, abilities shaped by inner strength, vulnerabilities shaped by emotion, and destinies shaped by choices. And through each encounter, Jotaro's understanding of his own stand deepened. Star Platinum became an extension of his intention, a silent promise of protection, standing beside him with unwavering loyalty. Yet beneath it all, the shadow of Dio continued to grow. Though distant, his presence pressed gently on Jotaro's consciousness like a cold whisper. Jotaro could feel it, subtle, unsettling, ancient, a thread connecting them, pulling them closer to a confrontation shaped not just by power, but by generations of history. Still, Jotaro moved forward calmly, carrying with him the quiet strength that defined him. He did not rush, did not fear, did not falter. He simply continued, step by steady step, guided by love for his mother, loyalty to his companions, and an unspoken desire to protect the world from the shadow rising once more. The birth of this new JoJo was not explosive. It was gentle, gradual, like a flame growing brighter in the darkness, offering warmth in a cold world. And as the journey carried them farther from home and deeper into the unknown, Jotaro Kujo stepped fully into his role, with Star Platinum at his side, a guardian shaped by spirit, standing quietly in the night. There is something deeply soothing about a journey that unfolds slowly across distant lands, each step guided by purpose, each sunrise gently illuminating the path forward. The voyage of the Stardust Crusaders began in this quiet way, a soft, steady march across continents, pulled onward by love, destiny, and the faint whisper of a threat stirring far beyond the horizon. Jotaro, Joseph, Avdol, Kakyoin, and Polnareff embarked not with fanfare, but with a quiet determination that seemed to hum beneath their breath, like a calm wind guiding them toward the unknown. Their mission, though urgent, carried a sense of solemn serenity. They traveled with the knowledge that Holy's life depended on their success, yet their resolve did not burn hot like a flame. Instead, it glowed softly, like a lantern carried carefully through the night, gentle, unwavering, and fueled by love. Each day brought new landscapes, new colors, new textures of the world they moved through, the sound of waves brushing against the hull of the ship, the sandy hush of distant deserts, the soft rustling of leaves in foreign forests. Even the stillness of long nights under distant stars seemed to cradle their journey in a quiet kind of wonder. As they moved across the world, they encountered stand users drawn into their path by the subtle gravity of Dio's influence. Some came as enemies, striking with strange abilities shaped by their own inner storms. Others arrived as strangers who would soon become friends. And through each meeting, the Crusaders grew closer, their spirits weaving together like threads of a shared tapestry. Kakyoin, with his calm intellect, often watched from a thoughtful distance, trying to understand the deeper patterns behind each stand ability they encountered. His stand, Hierophant Green, flowed like gentle water, smooth, flexible, capable of weaving through narrow spaces with quiet grace. In each battle, Kakyoin's movements were deliberate, almost meditative, shaped not by aggression but by careful understanding. And in the quiet after each confrontation, he would often reflect softly, offering insights that helped guide the group toward the next step of their journey. Polnareff added a different kind of warmth. His emotions shimmered close to the surface, honest and unguarded, carrying both strength and vulnerability. Silver Chariot, his stand, moved with elegance and speed, shining like moonlit steel. There was something deeply human in Polnareff's presence, a mixture of resilience and longing that made him both brave and tender. As the days passed, his laughter, his grief, his hope, and his courage became integral strands in the companionship that formed among the Crusaders. Avdol, ever steady, was the grounding presence. His voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had seen much of the world and understood the balance between light and shadow. His stand, Magician's Red, radiated a controlled warmth that felt almost like a heartbeat, a steady flame that neither wavered nor roared, but glowed with quiet strength. Avdol offered stability to the group, guiding them gently through the emotional turbulence of their encounters. When doubt crept in, his words soothed. When fear whispered, his presence reassured. Joseph Joestar, carrying the memories of the Ripple era etched softly into his spirit, brought both experience and a comforting sense of familiarity. His stand, Hermit Purple, manifested in delicate tendrils of spiritual energy, fragile in appearance, yet deeply connected to the mysterious forces that shaped their world. Joseph's wisdom, tinged with a gentle humor and a quiet sadness, reminded the group of the long lineage they represented. He knew that their journey was not just an adventure. It was the continuation of a legacy that had begun long before any of them were born. And at the center of it all was Jotaro, silent, steady, watchful. Star Platinum moved with him, like a guardian carved from stillness, its presence a constant reassurance. Even when Jotaro said little, everyone felt the depth of his commitment. His quiet strength was not cold, it was calm, like deep water reflecting the sky. He carried the weight of the journey on his shoulders, yet he bore it without bitterness. every step he took was for Holy. Every danger he faced was for the people he loved. And though he rarely expressed his emotions openly, his actions spoke with a tenderness stronger than words. As the Crusaders traveled from Japan to Hong Kong, through Singapore, across India, and toward the deserts of the Middle East, their bond deepened. They faced battles that tested their spirits, abilities that turned reality inside out, enemies who fought with desperation and sorrow, and circumstances that forced each of them to look inward. Yet beneath every challenge ran a thread of quiet resilience. Between battles, they shared meals, stories, and moments of rest that softened the edges of their journey. Sometimes, during long evenings on the road, they would fall into gentle conversation beneath lantern light, speaking quietly about their hopes, their regrets, and their dreams for a peaceful future. Each stand they faced reflected a different inner world. Some enemies fought with anger, some with fear, some with the desperate hope of reclaiming something they'd lost. In these moments, the Crusaders began to understand that stands were not simply weapons, they were windows into the soul. And through these windows, the group learned to see others with a deeper compassion. As the journey stretched onward, a sense of quiet inevitability began to build. Dio's presence, although distant, cast a soft shadow across their path, subtle, chilling, always just beyond sight. Yet instead of folding beneath this pressure, the Crusaders found themselves moving with greater unity, their spirits aligning with gentle certainty. They had come too far to turn back. The rhythm of the journey carried them forward, like a tide pulling toward a distant shore. In the warm hush of many nights, as the world around them settled into sleep, each member of the group felt the same quiet truth echoing softly within, that they were not simply traveling across continents, they were traveling toward their destiny. And though the road ahead grew darker, the light they carried within themselves glowed brighter with every step. The Crusaders' journey continued, and with each passing day, their hearts, their stands, and their spirits grew more intertwined, guiding them deeper into the unfolding story that awaited in the distant sands of Egypt. There is a gentle warmth that grows between companions who face the unknown together, a quiet connection that does not shout or demand attention, but instead settles softly in the spaces between them. Along the Crusaders' long journey across continents, this warmth became the invisible thread that wove their spirits together. It was not the kind of friendship born in the quick sparks of easy days, but one nurtured in the hush of shared burdens, shared dangers, and shared hope. In this way, the bonds among Jotaro, Joseph, Avdol, Kakyoin, and Polnareff deepened, not with loud declarations, but with small, steady acts of trust. Each member of the group carried their own history, their own quiet pain, their own secret longings. Yet as the days passed, these inner worlds slowly revealed themselves, not through force, but through soft moments of vulnerability. When Polnareff spoke of his sister, his voice trembled with sorrow he rarely allowed others to see. When Kakyoin watched the horizon in silence, there was a wistful distance in his eyes, as though he were remembering a childhood shaped by loneliness. Even Avdol, steady and grounded, carried memories of past battles with a gentle heaviness that never fully left his posture. And though Jotaro said little, those close to him understood that his silence was not distance, it was depth. His quiet nature held layers of tenderness, loyalty, and resolve that revealed themselves only in the clarity of his actions. He was not one to express affection through words, but through the calm way he stepped forward to protect others, through the way he positioned himself between danger and his companions, through the way Star Platinum moved with unwavering vigilance at his side. In this quiet language, Jotaro spoke volumes. During their travels, they often found themselves sharing simple meals. Sometimes it was a quiet breakfast beneath soft morning light. Sometimes it was a modest dinner beneath the deep blue sky where stars shimmered like distant lanterns. In these gentle moments, laughter came easily, soft, sincere, shaped by relief after long battles. Kakyoin might offer a thoughtful observation that made the others smile. Polnareff might tell a story with sweeping gestures and earnest passion. Joseph might add one of his half-serious, half-playful warnings about the mysteries that awaited them. And Jotaro, though rarely speaking, would allow the faint hint of amusement to flicker across his features, small but noticeable to those who knew him. But the bonds between them were shaped not only by warmth, sometimes they were shaped by friction as well. There were days when emotions ran too heavy, too sharp, too close to the heart. Polnareff, emotional and impulsive, sometimes pushed forward too quickly. Jotaro, cautious and controlled, occasionally clashed with him, offering calm restraint in the moments when Polnareff's passion ignited too fast. Yet even in these disagreements, there was no true anger. Beneath the surface, each man held a deep respect for the others, and the friction itself became another thread in their shared tapestry. There were also moments when rivalry shaped their interactions, gentle, almost playful in spirit. Kakyoin and Jotaro occasionally exchanged quiet glances of competitive energy during battles, testing their precision, their instincts, their connection with their stands. Polnareff, with Silver Chariot's elegant finesse, often measured himself against the raw power and sharp accuracy of Star Platinum. Yet none of these rivalries ever grew bitter. Instead, they reflected admiration and acknowledgement of the strengths they saw in one another. As their companionship deepened, the group learned to read each other in subtle ways. Joseph could sense when Jotaro was quietly troubled, even if he said nothing. Avdol could tell when Polnareff's heart was heavy, and his comforting presence often eased the Frenchman's grief. Kakyoin knew when Jotaro was preparing to act before it happened, noticing the smallest shift in posture, the faintest change in his expression. These quiet understandings strengthened them, weaving their spirits closer together with every passing day. The deepest moments of connection, however, often emerged after battles, when adrenaline faded and silence settled softly around them. After defeating a challenging enemy, the Crusaders sometimes found themselves sitting together on a quiet ledge, overlooking a new landscape they had never seen before. The world around them would calm, as if offering them a chance to breathe. In these delicate spaces, their hearts aligned in the shared awareness that each battle had brought them closer to their goal, closer to saving Holy, closer to ending Dio's lingering shadow. One evening, as they rested beneath a deep purple sky, Polnareff softly thanked the group for standing beside him. His voice was gentle, almost fragile, carrying the weight of gratitude he rarely expressed. Avdol placed a steady hand on his shoulder, offering warmth without needing words. Kakyoin looked toward the moonlit sky, his gaze soft, as if quietly agreeing. Joseph smiled with the kind of paternal affection that made Polnareff feel understood, and Jotaro, silent but present, nodded once, a small gesture, yet so full of meaning. Moments like these became quiet treasures along their journey. They were not grand or dramatic. They were soft, human, sincere. They reminded the Crusaders that they were no longer walking alone. Each of them carried worries and wounds, but each also carried the gentle strength of knowing someone else would stand beside them, no matter how strange or dangerous the path ahead became. Even as battles grew more complex, and enemy stand users revealed abilities that twisted reality in unsettling ways, the Crusaders remained united. Their stands were reflections of their inner worlds, and those reflections revealed not only their power, but their humanity. Each stand moved differently, breathed differently, fought differently, yet they all moved with the same quiet intention: to protect one another, to guide each other, to reach Dio before time slipped away from Holy's fragile life. This unity became their greatest strength, not the sharpness of Star Platinum's fists, nor the reach of Hierophant Green, nor the flame of Magician's Red, not the precision of Silver Chariot, nor the spiritual connection of Hermit Purple. Their greatest strength was the invisible thread binding their spirits, the trust that allowed each of them to move with certainty, knowing that someone else would be there to catch them if they fell. In the soft unfolding of their journey, the Crusaders grew not only as warriors, but as companions. Their bonds, formed in the quiet spaces between battles, carried them forward like a steady tide, guiding them gently toward the destiny awaiting them in Egypt. There are families whose histories unfold softly across time, weaving themselves into the quiet rhythm of generations. And then there are families like the Joestars, whose legacy echoes like a gentle but powerful current beneath the surface of the world, unseen by most, yet felt by all who cross its path. The Joestar line, shaped by destiny, courage, and quiet resilience, stretches across continents, centuries, and shifting eras, forming a tapestry rich with sacrifice, hope, and the mysterious threads of fate. The legacy began with George Joestar I, a man whose life changed the moment he believed Dio's father had saved him. From that single moment of mistaken gratitude grew a connection that would alter the entire shape of the family's future. Yet even in this mistake, there was tenderness, a glimpse into the compassion that would become a hallmark of the Joestar line. George raised Jonathan with gentle wisdom, unaware that the boy would soon be drawn into a conflict far greater than childhood rivalries. And even when tragedy came for him in the quiet, cruel manner of fate, George's memory lived on in Jonathan's gentle heart. Jonathan Joestar, the first JoJo, shaped the earliest pillar of the legacy, not through power alone, but through a noble spirit. His heart was steady, open, kind. When shadows rose around him, he faced them not with aggression, but with a quiet determination that reflected the purity of his soul. Though his life was short, it shone brightly, illuminating the path that future generations would walk, one where strength would always be guided by compassion. His final moments, holding Dio in a desperate embrace aboard the doomed ship, were not marked by hatred, but by a profound acceptance of duty. In that sacrifice, Jonathan planted the seeds of everything the Joestar family would become. From Jonathan's courage sprang the next chapter. Joseph Joestar, mischievous yet warm-hearted, whose wit and resourcefulness reflected the adaptability of the Joestar spirit. Joseph learned the ripple not simply as a means of fighting, but as a way of harmonizing with the world around him. His journey against ancient enemies tested not only his strength, but his heart. And even as he aged, Joseph carried his legacy with humor, tenderness, and a lingering sadness for those he'd lost. His presence bridged the old world and the new, connecting the golden warmth of Haman to the mysterious energy of Stans that would emerge generations later. Then came Jotaro Kujo, whose quiet nature concealed an ocean of loyalty and strength. Jotaro represented the modern era of the Joestar line, a blend of stoicism, steel, and hidden tenderness. His stand, Star Platinum, reflected the precision and intensity of his spirit, yet beneath its dynamic power lay gentle awareness. Jotaro's journey revealed a new dimension of the Joestar legacy, the ability to adapt to a world where destiny no longer flowed through ancient magic alone, but through manifestations of the soul. His resolve to save Holy, his mother, echoed Jonathan's devotion, while his courage echoed Joseph's daring. In Jotaro, the legacy intertwined into a clearer, more tangible shape. But the Joestar lineage did not end with them. It stretched beyond, reaching into stories yet to unfold, stories of Josuke, Giorno, Jolene, and others whose lives were subtly shaped by the threads woven long before their time. Each new Joestar inherited not only a birthmark, but a quiet echo of those who came before: Jonathan's kindness, Joseph's spirit, Jotaro's resolve. These echoes did not weigh upon them. Instead, they glowed softly within, guiding their steps toward futures shaped by their own hearts. As the Crusaders traveled, the legacy's weight was felt not as burden, but as gentle grounding. When Jotaro closed his eyes in moments of stillness, he sometimes felt as though the quiet strength of his ancestors hovered around him, Jonathan's pure heart, Joseph's steady presence, and the faint warmth of bonds he had never known. It was almost like hearing a distant lullaby, soft and reassuring, reminding him that he was not walking alone. Joseph, too, felt the presence of the past. Though older, he often reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The long battles he'd faced, the friends he'd lost, and the quiet sunsets he'd shared with those he cherished. He knew that the Joestar legacy was not just forged through conflict, but through love. Love for family, for friends, for the quiet moments that softened even the longest journeys. Sometimes, when the nights were still, Joseph would speak of his grandfather's courage or his mother's warmth, telling the younger Crusaders stories that seemed to shimmer with gentle nostalgia. Avdol, Kakyoin, and Polnareff listened to these stories with quiet reverence. Though not born into the Joestar line, they became part of its unfolding legacy through loyalty and shared purpose. They understood that the Joestar family was not defined by blood alone. It was defined by the intangible qualities that radiated from those who bore its name: courage in the face of darkness, compassion even in sorrow, and an unyielding resolve to stand against cruelty. In traveling with Jotaro and Joseph, they became woven into the lineage's ever-expanding story. What made the Joestar legacy truly special was not its supernatural battles or its generational conflicts. What made it remarkable was its softness, the quiet bravery that endured, even when shadows pressed close. Jonathan's gentle strength, Joseph's warm resilience, Jotaro's silent loyalty. Together, They formed a lineage shaped not simply by power, but by heart. As the Crusaders continued forward, each step brought them closer to Dio, the ancient shadow that had haunted the family since Jonathan's era. Yet their journey did not feel lonely. Behind them lay generations of gentle bravery, and beside them walked companions who carried the same spirit of hope. The legacy pulsed softly beneath their feet, like a heartbeat guiding them through the unfolding night. And even though the path ahead grew darker, the quiet glow of the Joestar spirit remained, steady, warm, unwavering, illuminating the way forward, just as it always had. There are towns in the world that seem to breathe with a life of their own, quiet places wrapped in gentle hills, wandering streets, and a stillness that feels timeless. Morio, nestled beneath soft morning mists and warm afternoon skies, was one such place. To most, it appeared peaceful, almost sleepy. Its rivers moved with unhurried grace, and its streets carried the scent of blooming gardens and distant ocean winds. Yet beneath its calm exterior, something subtle and strange shimmered, like light bending gently beneath the surface of water. This was where the next chapter of the Joestar story would softly unfold. In this serene town lived Josuke Higashikata, a young man whose smile warmed the spaces around him, whose heart held both quiet compassion and an earnest strength. Josuke was different from the Joestars before him, not only in upbringing, but in spirit. Where Jonathan embodied serene nobility, Joseph carried clever mischief, and Jotaro moved with silent determination. Josuke radiated a kindness that felt soothing, like a gentle breeze drifting through open windows on a calm afternoon. And yet, within him slept a power unlike any that had come before, one that could both heal and break, mend and shatter, harm and restore. Crazy Diamond, Josek's stand, reflected this unique essence. It moved with dazzling speed and brilliant strength, yet possessed a warmth that felt almost nurturing. It could restore shattered objects to their original form, reconstruct broken things with quiet tenderness, and sometimes even heal wounds, stitching together what life had torn apart. This duality, power and gentleness, became the heartbeat of Josek's journey, guiding him through the soft but strange mysteries hidden within Morio's winding streets. When Jotaro arrived in Morio, his presence carried the quiet weight of urgency. Though the town looked peaceful beneath drifting clouds and the distant shimmer of sunlight, he knew something unfamiliar stirred beneath its tranquility, an echo of the bow and arrow, the artifact capable of awakening stand abilities in those touched by fate. Jotaro sought out Josuke not only because of their bloodline, but because destiny whispered his name softly into the unfolding story of Morio. And when Jotaro finally met him, he felt a gentle certainty settle in his chest. Josuke was a Joestar in spirit as much as in name. Though startled by this sudden introduction to the world of stands, Josuke adapted with remarkable grace. He accepted the truth of his lineage with quiet humility, not pride. He did not see his abilities as tools of superiority, but as a responsibility to protect the town he loved, its people, its memories, its peaceful days. And so, carrying both determination and gentle warmth, Yosuke stepped naturally into the strange mysteries that began unfolding around him. Morio, beneath the soft glow of dawn and dusk, started to reveal its secrets. New stand users emerged, each one shaped by the quiet pull of the bow and arrow. Some were kind, others misguided, and a few carried shadows deep within their hearts. But Josuke approached each encounter with a calm steadiness, seeking not the thrill of conflict, but the restoration of peace. Even when danger rose, he fought with intention, to protect, not to destroy. Alongside him walked friends who formed the emotional heartbeat of this era. Okuyasu, whose rough exterior hid a gentle soul longing for connection, found in Josuke a friendship that soothed old wounds. Koichi, soft-spoken yet noble at heart, discovered his own strength through the evolution of his stand echoes, whose delicate transformations mirrored his gradual awakening. Together, these companions formed a gentle trio whose presence brought warmth to Morio's unfolding mysteries. Their days were filled with strange encounters, unusual stand abilities, enigmatic strangers, and hidden dangers that lurked behind the calm face of the town. Some stand powers manifested through art, others through sound, others through shifting space or bending form. Each one reflected the inner worlds of those who carried them, revealing fears, hopes, and desires they had never spoken aloud. And in every encounter, Josuke's compassion shaped the outcome. He sought to understand rather than simply oppose. He looked for the hurt behind the hostility, the longing behind the conflict. Often, in the gentle aftermath of battle, he offered kindness where others might have offered judgment. Morio's streets, once ordinary, became a gentle stage for these mysterious encounters. The sound of school bells, the warmth of visiting cafes, the quiet of long afternoons, the town's familiar rhythms continued even as strangeness wove through them. In many ways, the bizarre and the ordinary coexisted peacefully, like sunlight dancing on water, creating a shimmer both surreal and beautiful. Yet beneath all these gentle moments, a deeper shadow slowly unfurled. An unseen force moved quietly through the town, shaping events with deliberate subtlety. It manifested in strange disappearances, sudden awakenings of stand powers, and disturbances that whispered through Morio's calm nights. Though the inhabitants lived their daily lives, something unsettling hovered beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to rise. Still, Josuke remained steady. Every challenge he faced seemed to reveal another layer of his warmth, another depth of his spirit. When friends faltered, he lifted them. When enemies softened, he forgave them. When the town trembled, he reached out with Crazy Diamond's healing glow, restoring what had been harmed. In Josuke, Morio found not a warrior of destruction, but a guardian of restoration, someone who mended both broken walls and broken hearts. Through gentle sunsets and quiet moonlit nights, Yosuke's journey unfolded with a calm yet compelling rhythm. He did not seek glory or recognition. He simply wished for Morio to remain a peaceful place where laughter lingered in its parks, where breezes whispered through quiet neighborhoods, where families felt safe beneath the soft glow of street lamps. And so, even as the mysteries deepened, Josuke carried his hope forward like a lantern, illuminating the shadows the bow and arrow had drawn into the town. The Crazy Diamond era had begun, shimmering with gentle mystery and warm-hearted courage. And though the most profound challenge still slept beneath the surface of Morio's quiet streets, the spirit of Josuke Higashikata remained a steady, soothing presence, ready to confront the bizarre with kindness, ready to restore what darkness threatened to unravel. There is a gentle truth that emerges in the quieter corners of Morio. Every stand is more than a power. It is a whisper of the soul, an echo of the heart, a quiet projection of who a person truly is beneath the surface. In this peaceful town, where sunlight drifts softly across rooftops and shadows stretch lazily across winding streets, each stand user carries not only the weight of their ability, but the weight of their inner world. And as Josuke, Okuyasu, Koichi, and their growing circle of companions walked through this town, they discovered that every encounter, even the bizarre ones, held seeds of emotional awakening. Koichi Hiroshi, gentle and earnest, embodied this truth most clearly. When he first arrived in Morio's mysterious unfolding, he was quiet, almost fragile, unsure of the strength resting quietly within him. But his stand, Echoes, did not appear all at once. It grew with him, evolving from a small, simple form into something more expressive, more powerful, more resonant with the soft courage in Koichi's heart. Each new stage of Echoes reflected a new stage of his emotional growth. It was as though Koichi's stand was gently teaching him to see his own worth, to recognize that strength can be quiet and still be immense. Through Echoes, Koichi learned to trust himself. The stand's abilities, first sound, then vibration, and later atmospheric transformation, mirrored the subtle but profound ways he began to influence the world around him. Koichi discovered that a soft voice could still create ripples, a small presence could still make a difference. And with each evolution of Echoes, he found himself standing a little taller, stepping a little more confidently into the unfolding story of Morio. Okuyasu Nijimura, with his warm heart hidden beneath a rugged exterior, experienced a different kind of growth. His stand, the hand, held immense destructive power, able to erase space itself with a single swipe. Yet Okuyasu's journey was not about learning to wield that power more aggressively. It was about learning gentleness, patience, understanding. Beneath his brashness, Okuyasu carried deep wounds from his past, the loss of his brother, the strange and sorrowful influence of Keicho's mission, the fear of abandonment that lingered like a quiet ache in his chest. But through Josuke's friendship, kind, unwavering, and sincere, Okuyasu discovered that he could move forward without losing the soft places in his heart. He learned that strength was not only measured in the power of a stand, but in the capacity to forgive, to heal, and to reach towards something brighter. The hand, a stand of destruction, became a symbol of Okuyasu's desire to choose creation instead, choosing connection over isolation, choosing belonging over fear. Josuke's own stand Crazy Diamond revealed its philosophy through every gentle reconstruction, every healing touch, every restoration of what had been broken. In a world where stands often reflected conflict or internal turmoil, Crazy Diamond reflected Josuke's compassion. It taught him that healing was its own form of strength, that kindness could be powerful, and that restoring someone's hope was as meaningful as any battle. When Josuke used Crazy Diamond, he wasn't simply repairing objects, he was acknowledging the humanity in others, offering peace where there had been pain, offering light where there had been fracture, and even those who initially stood as obstacles found themselves changed by the quiet power of personal growth. Shigechi, whose naive greed led to conflict, discovered the warmth of genuine friendship, even if only briefly. His stand, Harvest, reflected community, cooperation, and the small joys of working together. Though his story carried sorrow, his presence illuminated the gentle truth that even in a world filled with strange powers, connection remained at the heart of everything. Tamami Kobayashi learned humility through contact with Yosuke's kindness. His stand, the lock, revealed the weight of guilt, real or imagined, showing how emotions could trap the heart. Yet Tamami's transformation, sparked by compassion rather than force, reminded the group that growth often blossoms when someone finally sees themselves through the eyes of another. And then there was Yukako Yamagishi, a young woman whose heart burned with intensity, whose love felt too fierce for her own spirit to contain. Her stand, Love Deluxe, reflected both her passion and her insecurity, an extension of her yearning to be understood, accepted, cherished. Through her interactions with Koichi, she learned the quiet beauty of balance, that love does not need to suffocate, that strength does not need to dominate, that tenderness can coexist with passion. In her, Morio witnessed the delicate unfolding of emotional transformation, wild, then soft, then genuine. As these individuals crossed paths with Yosuke and his friends, Morio itself seemed to breathe with a deeper rhythm. Every encounter added another thread to the town's quiet tapestry. Sunlit afternoons turned into gentle evenings, filled with reflection. Conversations carried soft undertones of change. Battles, though intense, resolved not with bitterness, but with understanding. It was as though the town had become a sanctuary where growth could flourish, where people could confront the shadows in their hearts and emerge into softer light. Jotaro Kujo watched all of this with calm awareness. Though his demeanor remained quiet and composed, he recognized something special in Morio. Here stands were not only tools for conflict, they were mirrors that revealed the deepest parts of the soul. And the young people of this town, through courage and vulnerability, were learning to face those reflections with honesty. Jotaro saw in Josuke the same noble heart that guided Jonathan. He saw in Koichi the quiet strength that reminded him of his mother's gentle spirit. He saw in Okuyasu the wounded resilience that echoed through every generation of Joestars and their allies. In the soft unfolding of Morio's days, the Crusaders of this era shaped themselves gently. Not through grand wars or sweeping epics, but through small, meaningful transformations, each one a whisper of the heart, learning to trust itself again. As Morio drifted through its peaceful rhythms, the hum of cicadas, the glow of streetlights, the breeze brushing softly against the ocean, the stand users who lived there continued to grow. Their hearts strengthened, their spirits opened, and their bonds deepened, weaving their stories together in a warm, comforting embrace that held them gently through the unfolding mysteries yet to come. In the stillness that often blankets the town of Morio, there lingers a strange artifact, simple in appearance, yet brimming with quiet power. The bow and arrow. To the unknowing eye, it may seem like little more than a relic of metal and wood, but to those who have felt its influence, it is something far more profound. It is the silent hand behind the awakening of many stand abilities, the unseen force that stirs souls and uncovers inner worlds. It does not shout, it does not glow, it simply chooses, striking like a whisper into the lives of those who cross its path. The bow and arrow arrived in Morio long before most realized it. Passed secretly between hands, it moved like a breeze through shadow, touching lives quietly, profoundly. Where it had come from was unclear. Some said it was created from fragments of an ancient meteorite, a cosmic stone from beyond the stars that fell quietly to Earth long ago. Others believed it was shaped by intention, that it was never meant for the world of the ordinary, that it existed solely to awaken the extraordinary. Whatever its origin, the artifact carried a quiet intelligence. It seemed to sense who was worthy and who was not. Keicho Nijimura, Okuyasu's older brother, was one of the first in Morio to understand its power. Consumed by a need to create stand users, he believed the bow and arrow might give rise to those strong enough to protect or destroy his family's cursed fate. He used the arrow deliberately, choosing people from all walks of life, testing their souls without fully grasping the consequences. He saw the stand ability as salvation, a weapon, a way to control fate. But the arrow never moved blindly. Those it pierced did not always survive. It was not cruelty, it was harmony. If a soul could not withstand the awakening, if it cracked instead of blossomed, the stand would not form. The result would be silence. A life ended before it could be reshaped. But for those whose spirits resonated, the arrow acted as a key. It did not create strength. It revealed it, pulled it forward from the depths, allowed it to form a shape, a voice, a presence beside its bearer. In Morio, the arrow awakened many. Some, like Koichi, found their true selves through the challenge. Others, like Tamami, were caught off guard by the weight of the ability that bloomed within them. Some ran from it, some embraced it, some used it for good. Others twisted it with confusion or desperation. Yet in every case, the arrow offered not judgment, but opportunity. When Josuke and his companions uncovered the truth of the arrow, a slow realization washed over them like early fog. So many of the bizarre occurrences in Morio had not been coincidence. The rippling of fate had been quietly guided by this object. Its power threaded through the town like roots beneath soil, subtle but undeniable. Battles, transformations, awakenings, they all led back to the same artifact. Jotaro recognized it immediately. The arrow was not new. He had encountered it before, elsewhere in the world, where its power had also stirred the change. He understood the danger it carried, but also its strange beauty. For in its silent way, it forced the soul to stand before itself. It demanded truth, and in doing so, it helped awaken possibilities no one could predict. Rohan Kishibe, the eccentric manga artist whose stand, Heaven's Door, allowed him to read and alter a person's life like pages in a book, was also a recipient of the arrow's gift. In his strange way, he too became part of the ever-deepening mystery. His stand, as peculiar and precise as his personality, reflected the fine lines of human stories, the small details that often went unnoticed. Rohan's stand didn't strike with power. It turned pages. It whispered. It saw. Another reminder that a stand, born of the arrow, was a portrait of the inner world, no matter how unusual. Yet not all who sought the arrow did so with understanding. There were those who wished to harness its power, to control it, to weaponize it. The danger lay not in the arrow itself, but in the intentions of those who held it. Like a mirror, it reflected whatever stood before it, be it hunger, fear, love, or longing. And so, the presence of the arrow in Morio became a quiet tension. A mystery curled softly at the heart of the town. Josuke, with his calm spirit and his gift for healing, understood that the arrow was not something to destroy, nor something to protect blindly. It was something to respect, something to approach gently. His encounters with stand users taught him that each person awakened by the arrow had their own story, sometimes painful, sometimes beautiful, always unique. And it was in listening to those stories, not silencing them, that Josuke found meaning. As days passed and more stand users emerged, the arrow seemed to grow heavier, not physically, but spiritually. It carried the weight of every soul it had touched, every path it had altered. It had become something more than an artifact. It was a symbol of choice, of awakening, of the strange potential hidden within quiet lives. Eventually, the group's journey would lead them to confront the one who had been using the arrow with the most dangerous intent, a presence darker, more calculating, more twisted by solitude and secrecy. But for now, the arrow remained in shadow, waiting for its part in the unfolding story to be fully understood. In the gentle streets of Morio, where the breeze brushed through trees and the sun dipped slowly into quiet evenings, the bow and arrow rested like a secret at the edge of memory. It had come from mystery. It had awakened the bizarre. And though no one fully knew why it had appeared in Morio, all could feel that it had arrived for a reason. It was a tool of fate, yes, but it was also an invitation to meet one's true self and to stand beside it in silence, in power, in whatever form the soul chose to become. There are places in the world where darkness does not arrive in loud waves, but instead seeps quietly through the cracks, settling in corners, whispering in the folds of ordinary life. In Morio, a town painted in gentle pastels and bathed in golden light, such darkness lived not in storms or shadows, but in silence. It moved beneath the calm rhythm of daily life, unnoticed by most, until it was far too close. The strange phenomena surrounding stand users had already begun to reshape the town's landscape. Yosuke and his companions had faced strange battles, softened strange hearts, and restored harmony where chaos had threatened. But as the summer days grew longer, a quiet tension began to settle. Something deeper, something older, a chill in the breeze that didn't belong, a sense hard to name that someone or something was hiding just out of sight. It began with whispers, stories of people disappearing, murmurs of footsteps in empty alleys, the soft click of a camera where no photographer stood. Rumors swirled like mist, too strange to believe, too persistent to ignore. Josuke and his friends began to listen. They began to notice. And what they found was not another enemy looking for a fight, but something far more unsettling, someone who wanted only to remain unseen. This was how they first felt the presence of Yoshikage Kira. Kira was not like other stand users. He did not seek power. He did not desire fame, vengeance, or chaos. He wanted silence, normalcy, an uninterrupted life, a life free from the gaze of others. Yet within that craving for peace lay something profoundly dangerous, because Kira's peace came not from harmony, but from control, from elimination, from the quiet removal of anything that disrupted his carefully arranged world. He blended in perfectly with Morio, a polite man, a working man, someone who bought sandwiches at the same shop every day, who walked the same route, who left behind no trace of irregularity. But beneath this image lay a darker truth. Kira was a killer, a man who had taken the lives of others with a kind of surgical detachment, who kept trophies not out of arrogance, but out of ritual, and whose stand, Killer Queen, reflected the same icy precision. Killer Queen was beautiful but deadly, silent, a stand that could destroy not with chaos, but with simplicity. A single touch, a quiet detonation, clean, final. The stand's sleek form mirrored Kira's worldview. Everything orderly, that's everything controlled. No mess, No noise, no witnesses. For a long time, Kira had operated unseen, but fate, always circling gently overhead, would not allow his secret to remain hidden forever. One day, a school bag was found, misplaced, innocently enough. Inside, it was something strange, something that did not belong. A human hand, carefully preserved, polished nails, cold, detached. It was the beginning of the unraveling. The first thread pulled from the edge of Kira's quiet life. Koichi, whose heart had grown steadily stronger with every encounter, sensed the danger first. He didn't know the full truth yet, but he felt the wrongness, like walking into a room where the air is too still. Josuke and Okuyasu followed, hearts steady, minds focused. What they found was not only disturbing, but chilling in its clarity. Kira had crafted a life around his impulses, designing routines to hide in plain sight. He did not revel in violence, but he could not stop. And worse, he believed himself entitled to the silence he had built atop his crimes. As the group traced his movements, Kira sensed the shift. For the first time in years, he felt exposed, watched, vulnerable, and with that realization, he changed, not in nature, but in strategy. He stole a new identity, slipped into a new face, hid once more in plain sight, blending back into the town he had never truly left. And just like that, the predator vanished into the crowd, taking with him a stand that could erase without a trace. The search for Kira became a test of everything the group had learned. They could not simply fight him head on. He did not present himself that way. He was not a villain in armor or a challenger with loud threats. He was a whisper in the dark, a presence behind a closed door, a name spoken once and then forgotten. Rohan Kishibe, with his piercing intuition, became instrumental in uncovering pieces of Kira's hidden life. His stand, Heaven's Door, allowed him to read fragments of truth from those who had brushed too close to the danger. Slowly, carefully, the pieces began to form. The outline of a life built in shadows, the stories of victims long gone, the quiet obsession that drove Kira's every step. And yet, as heavy as the search became, Morio itself remained quiet. The streets still glowed with morning light. The cafes still served tea. The ocean breeze still carried the scent of salt and summer. It was a strange dissonance that beneath such beauty, such peace, a monster had lived unbothered for years. But Josuke and his friends refused to let that truth remain buried. With every step, they brought light to the places where silence had reigned. They listened, they observed, they moved with care, and through it all, they held on to something that Kira could never understand. That true peace does not come from hiding or from silence. It comes from facing what must be faced and standing with those who will not turn away. And so, as Kira moved quietly through the town he believed he had mastered, Morio itself began to shift. The soft winds stirred differently. The light bent subtly, and beneath it all, a group of friends, bound not by destiny but by choice, carried forward, unraveling the quiet lie, bringing warmth into the cold places, and preparing gently for the moment when silence would break. In the golden hush of Morio's quiet streets, where children's laughter echoed gently through the alleys, and laundry swayed softly from balconies, a question lingered in the air like a fragile note. What does peace truly mean? For most of Morio's citizens, peace was a simple rhythm. Morning, coffee, familiar shopkeepers, the same sidewalks walked every day. And for the young stand users who had taken it upon themselves To protect the town from harm, peace had always seemed like something they could preserve, as long as they remained vigilant, as long as they stood together. But after the truth of Yoshikage Kira came to light, that illusion softened like fog under sunlight. The peace Morio had known was not one built on harmony, it was one maintained by what had remained hidden. Kira had lived among them, passed them on the street, bought his lunch beside them, and the quiet normalcy he projected had been a veil, covering the still and calculated terror that simmered beneath. For Josuke and the others, the pursuit of Kira became something more than a battle. It became a responsibility, a quiet vow not to let the silence win, because Kira's evil was not loud. It did not roar or shout. It was the kind that curled softly through the fabric of life, fraying it from within. The kind that smiled politely and vanished before anyone noticed it had arrived. Yet, in uncovering Kira's truth, the young protectors of Morio also found a deeper truth about themselves. That peace was not the absence of danger, it was the presence of justice, and that even in a town so gentle, so charming, there would always be moments where someone must step forward and quietly say, "No more." Josuke, steady and kind, carried the burden of this pursuit with a quiet nobility. His heart, always leaning toward healing, found itself tested. Crazy Diamond could mend broken bones, shattered glass, even a splintered wall. But could it fix the fabric of a town shaken by fear? Could it reach into the quiet trauma Kira had left behind and patch it together again? Josuke didn't have the answer, but he tried. Every day, as they searched for traces of the killer's new identity, Josuke offered comfort in small ways. A neighbor helped, a lost object restored, a hand offered to someone afraid. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, the restoration did not come in sweeping gestures, it came in the quiet, in the moments between chaos, in the steady breath after the storm. Koichi, too, had grown into someone different, no longer timid, no longer hesitant. His stand had evolved, and so had he. Echo's AC-3 moved with a confident grace that reflected Koichi's deepening sense of self. And as he hunted for Kira, his bravery wasn't just tactical, it was emotional. He believed deeply that people deserved to live without fear. That peace was not something handed to the lucky. It was something protected by those willing to act. Okuyasu moved with more determination now, his often playful demeanor softened by the weight of the mission. He had seen too much, felt too much, to pretend that everything was fine. His loyalty to Josuke remained unshakable, and beneath his occasional jokes and impulsive bursts of emotion, there was a quiet fury building, a need to ensure that no one else would suffer as he and his brother once had. Rohan Kishibe, ever the observer, played a strange but vital role. While his heart was often hidden beneath layers of eccentricity, he understood the shape of fear better than most. Through the pages of people's lives, opened and read through heaven's door, he saw how trauma settled like dust. He saw how Kira's presence had stained the lives of people who didn't even know his name, and it changed him, not dramatically, not visibly, but subtly, like ink drying into paper. As for Jotaro, he had returned to Morio not simply as an ally, but as a silent guardian. The burden of legacy rested on his shoulders, but he carried it without complaint. His eyes missed nothing. His presence brought quiet strength to every plan, every step forward. And when he spoke of Kira, his voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. He had faced monsters before, and this one, quiet as he may be, would not be allowed to slip away again. The search for Kira became a tapestry of small clues, subtle moments, delicate tensions, a discarded item, a photograph, a name half remembered, a face that didn't quite match the records. The group moved through the town like wind beneath the leaves, present but never loud. They knew that finding Kira meant understanding him, watching where he walked, sensing where he might hide, reading the silence, and as they moved deeper into the mystery, Morio itself seemed to shift. It remained beautiful, still glowing with sunsets and laughter, but beneath that beauty, something more powerful had taken root. Awareness, vigilance, a collective sense that peace was not something automatic. It required care, and that perhaps, somewhere within this town, there were more protectors than anyone had realized. But the deeper truth was this: Kira did not vanish because he was powerful. He vanished because he was ordinary. And that, more than any stand, was his greatest weapon. He understood routine, understood how to disappear within repetition. He became invisible not through ability, but through predictability. And that was why he was so dangerous. Still, Kira had made one mistake. He had underestimated the heart of the town he thought he could blend into forever, because Josuke and his friends weren't chasing him out of vengeance. They were chasing him because they believed Morio deserved to exhale again, to walk without fear, to live without shadows watching from behind a false smile. They believed in peace, not as an illusion, but as a promise, one they were willing to keep, even when it meant chasing a ghost. And in that pursuit, they became more than stand users. They became guardians, quiet defenders of a quiet town, a group of young souls who had discovered that even in the strangest of worlds, the most powerful thing one can do is protect what matters. There are battles that go beyond the physical, beyond the blood and sweat of combat. Some fights are not measured in punches or strikes, but in the weight of time, in the twisting of fate, and in the unraveling of what seems unbreakable. The world of stands, with its peculiar blend of power and vulnerability, had already witnessed its fair share of battles. But as Josuke and his friends ventured further into the heart of the mysteries surrounding Kira, they began to understand that the true test was not merely defeating an enemy, it was facing the very fabric of time itself. Diavolo, the shadowy figure whose influence had quietly shaped the events in Morio, was not merely a villain who stood before them. He was the personification of a paradox, a man who sought to control time, to erase fate itself, and to live beyond the boundaries that ordinary people were confined to. In his quest for immortality, Diavolo had become something more than human, a creature who manipulated the flow of time through his stand, King Crimson, and its deadly power to erase moments from existence. But Diavolo's pursuit of control had brought about a conflict greater than he could have ever imagined. His opponent, Giorno, was not simply a warrior of strength. He was the embodiment of hope, of destiny rewritten, and of the future that had yet to be shaped. Giorno's stand, Gold Experience Requiem, was a force of unimaginable power, born from the merging of his will with the mysterious energy of the arrow. It was a stand that did not simply operate within the confines of reality. It bent and twisted it, creating new possibilities with each breath, each thought, each decision. In many ways, Giorno was not the same as the others who had come before him. He had not been born into the Joestar legacy by blood, but his spirit, his drive, his understanding of fate had aligned him with the Joestars in a way that transcended lineage. Giorno's strength came not from revenge or ambition, but from the desire to protect the future, to create a world where cruelty would no longer reign. His battle with Diavolo, therefore, was not merely a confrontation between two men, it was a clash between two worlds. One ruled by the cruel manipulation of time, the other shaped by the potential for change and growth. As Giorno confronted Diavolo in the final moments of their long, twisted journey, the stakes grew ever higher. Time itself seemed to bend under the weight of their conflict. The world around them rippled as Gold Experience Requiem's power reshaped the battlefield. Diavolo's King Crimson, with its ability to erase moments and see the future, was met with Giorno's Stand, which rewrote the very laws of existence itself. It was a battle not only of strength, but of purpose, of two forces that represented the polar opposites of fate and free will. As the battle raged on, Josuke and his friends watched from the edges of this great conflict, feeling the weight of their own stories intertwining with Giorno's. Each of them had faced their own struggles, their own fears, and their own dark moments. Yet through it all, they had stood firm, each with their own quiet determination to protect the future, to safeguard the people they loved, and to resist the darkness that sought to unravel everything they held dear. The true power of Gold Experience Requiem, however, was not in its ability to destroy or to control. It was in its ability to restore, to give the future a chance to grow, to rewrite fate not with force, but with compassion. And in that quiet, unspoken moment, Giorno's Stand broke the very nature of time itself, causing Diavolo's Stand to falter, to lose its grip on reality, to be undone by the very laws of existence that it had tried so hard to control. In that final moment, Diavolo's fate was sealed, not through violence, but through the quiet unraveling of his own will. Giorno's victory was not a triumph of force, but of principle, the understanding that while time may pass, and while fate may twist, the future can always be rewritten by those who refuse to succumb to the darkness. As the world settled into the aftermath of the battle, a soft sense of peace washed over Morio. The tension that had gripped the town for so long began to dissipate, leaving behind a quiet certainty. The world had been given a chance to heal. The quiet hum of the everyday continued, as it always had, but now it carried a deeper resonance, as though the very air itself had shifted. The Joestars, though not always aware of it, had done what they had always done. They had rewritten fate, not through violence, but through love, compassion, and a quiet strength that flowed through them like an eternal river. Giorno, standing amidst the remnants of the battle, understood the significance of what had happened. He had not just defeated Diavolo. He had reshaped the world around him, forging a future that would be brighter, more just, and full of possibility. His victory was not his alone. It was the culmination of everything the Joestar family had stood for. The strength of will, the power of connection, and the ability to stand against the forces of darkness without losing sight of the light. As the dust of the battle settled, Josuke and the others came forward, joining Giorno in the quiet aftermath. Their journey was far from over, but in this moment, they understood the true power of their shared bond. Together, they had faced the unimaginable, Together, they had rewritten the world, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in soft twilight, they knew that, though the road ahead would be uncertain, they would walk it together, with love in their hearts and the quiet power to face whatever came next. In the quiet recesses of the human heart, there are moments when a person feels the soft stirrings of something greater than themselves, a whisper of fate, a flicker of something extraordinary waiting to awaken. For Giorno Giovanna, this moment had always been more than a passing thought. It had been a certainty, a pull of destiny that had quietly shaped his path from the very beginning. Born not of the Joestar bloodline, Giorno had been an outsider in many ways, yet his connection to the family, to their courage, to their unwavering will, ran deeper than mere inheritance. It was written in the quiet pulse of his soul, as if the bloodline of Jonathan Joestar had found its way to him through the winding corridors of fate. From the very moment Giorno first encountered the world of stands, he knew that his journey was not simply about power, but about the promise of something more. He was destined to reshape the world, not with violence, but with vision. Giorno's stand gold experience was a manifestation of this vision, a stand that could create life, imbue the inanimate with the breath of possibility. It was a beautiful power, one that could heal, create, and restore. Yet it was not enough simply to wield this power. Giorno understood, even as a young man, that to truly awaken his potential, he would need to take control of his own future. He would need to claim his place in the world of stands, and that meant confronting the darkness that loomed over his family's legacy. His journey began quietly, but with an intensity that grew with each step. Giorno was not driven by vengeance or hate, but by a quiet hope for a better world, a world free from the cruelty and manipulation that had taken root in the hearts of those who sought power without compassion. His encounter with the notorious gang in Italy, the powerful Pione mafia organization, would serve as the catalyst for this transformation. The road ahead would not be one of comfort. It would be a battle against the forces that had kept the people in a stranglehold of fear and oppression. Yet Giorno's path, even in its darkest moments, remained steadfast. He was not driven by anger, but by an unshakable belief that the world could be remade, that it could be healed. This quiet determination became the beating heart of his journey as he moved through Pione, uncovering its secrets, unraveling its ties to the underworld, and setting his sights on becoming its leader. Giorno's growth was subtle, but profound. He did not seek fame, nor the admiration of others. What he sought was change, transformation, both within himself and the world around him. He would become the head of Pione, but not for the sake of power. He would take control of the organization so that he could shape it into something better, something that would use its influence to protect, to heal, and to guide. His aim was not to destroy the system, but to rebuild it, to transform it from a force of terror into a force of good. Through the trials he faced, Giorno's stand evolved as well. Gold Experience Requiem, born from his connection with the arrow, awakened in him the ability to not only create life, but to bend reality itself. Gold Experience Requiem was more than just a weapon. It was a force of nature, one that defied the very laws of time and space. It was a stand of such power that it could rewrite the fate of an individual, undoing the harm done by the forces of darkness. In the moments of greatest struggle, Gold Experience Requiem became Giorno's ally in the truest sense, an extension of his will and his compassion. Yet even as he faced these great challenges, Giorno's heart remained untouched by bitterness. He was a man of calm, of steady resolve, whose strength lay not in his ability to defeat others, but in his ability to move forward with grace. Where others fought with rage, Giorno fought with clarity. Where others sought destruction, Giorno sought creation. He understood that true power did not come from domination. It came from the ability to see beyond the immediate, to understand the long-term consequences of one's actions, and to act with kindness, even when confronted with the darkest of foes. Giorno's vision was not merely a personal ambition. It was a vision that sought to change the world, to rewrite the future for those who had no voice, for those who had been crushed beneath the weight of corruption and fear. His strength lay in his compassion, his ability to connect with others on a deep and meaningful level. He did not see the world in terms of enemies and allies. He saw it in terms of potential. He saw the good in people, even when it was buried beneath layers of pain, fear, and loss. And it was through this vision, through his belief in the inherent goodness of humanity, that Giorno found the strength to rise. As he moved through the ranks of Pione, Giorno began to understand the true nature of leadership. It was not about command. It was about inspiration. It was about setting an example, showing others the way, and guiding them toward a common goal. His journey was not a solitary one. He was not alone in his fight. He was surrounded by those who believed in his vision, who trusted him, and who were willing to sacrifice for the greater good. Through every battle, every hardship, Giorno's character deepened. He became more than just a stand user. He became a symbol of hope. His stand, Gold Experience Requiem, became not just a tool, but a testament to his unwavering will, his compassion, and his desire to create a better world. In the end, it was not his stand that defined him. It was his heart, his vision, and his willingness to fight for a future where kindness and compassion and justice would reign. And in that quiet, steadfast journey, Giorno Giovanna awakened not only the power within himself, but the power to change the world around him. He became not just the leader of Pione, but the embodiment of hope, a living testament to the belief that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, there is always the possibility for light. The world of organized crime is a strange one, where alliances shift as easily as shadows, and the line between friend and foe often blurs into something unrecognizable. It is a world built not on trust, but on power. The kind of power that moves beneath the surface of human society, unseen but ever present. For Giorno Giovanna, the quiet journey toward reshaping the mafia world began not with grand speeches or violent declarations, but with a single, simple truth. To bring peace to a broken system, you must first learn to navigate its complexities. Pione, the organization Giorno had infiltrated, was the beating heart of the Italian mafia, a labyrinth of corruption, betrayal, and unspoken rules. From the outside, it appeared as a well-oiled machine, its members moving in perfect synchronization, each one playing their part in a complex dance of money, power, and influence. But beneath this polished exterior lay a rotting core, greed, fear, and the blood of those who had been consumed by the pursuit of power. Giorno's entry into this world was not by choice, but by necessity. His ambitions were never driven by the desire for wealth or domination. He had no interest in the traditional trappings of power, luxury, fame, or recognition. His goal was far simpler, yet infinitely more complex: to change the system from within, to turn the mafia's ruthless machinery into something that could protect the innocent rather than prey upon them. In the early days of Giorno's rise, it was clear that the organization was a fractured one, each faction operating with its own agenda. Pione was a beast with many heads, each pulling in a different direction, each chasing a different kind of power. There were those who believed in control through fear, others who sought domination through manipulation, and those who wished to carve out their own piece of the world by any means necessary. For Giorno, the challenge was not merely to rise through the ranks, it was to unite these fractured factions, to mold them into something greater, to show them a vision of a world where they no longer needed to live in fear or isolation. But Giorno's path was not a smooth one. The mafia world was built on treachery, and the more power he gained, the more enemies he made. The other members of Pione saw his potential, but they also saw him as a threat, a young man with ambitions that threatened to dismantle the very system that had sustained them for years. They underestimated Giorno, as many before him had underestimated the power of hope, compassion, and vision. But Giorno had something they did not: the unshakable will to create something better, something that would not require the violence and betrayal that had defined the mafia for so long. Each step in Giorno's journey required him to challenge the established order, to outmaneuver those who sought to maintain the status quo. His rise was not marked by flashy displays of power, but by subtle, calculated moves that undermined his enemies and strengthened his position. He did not seek to destroy the mafia's system, but to transform it from within, to show that power could be wielded with compassion and justice. This transformation was not easy. Giorno was not the only one with a vision for the future. His allies, though loyal, were driven by their own motivations, their own desires. They were not all of the same mind, and each had their own way of seeing the world. Bucciarati, the captain of the group, believed in loyalty and honor, but even he was not immune to the darkness that had taken root in the mafia. Trish, the daughter of the notorious Don, was a symbol of innocence lost in the brutal world of crime. Her stand, Spice Girl, was a manifestation of her strength and resilience, but it was also a reminder of the harsh reality they all faced. Yet through all the power struggles and betrayals, Giorno's determination never wavered. He understood that true leadership was not about control. It was about inspiration. It was about showing others a vision of what could be, not just what was. Giorno's vision was one of hope, a world where power was used not to oppress, but to uplift. He knew that to change the system, he had to be the one to break it open, to reveal its flaws and weaknesses, and to show the world that there was another way. As Giorno's influence grew within Pione, so did the stakes. The closer he came to the top, the more dangerous the game became. The other factions saw him as a threat, and they began to move against him. But Giorno was not intimidated. He had the power of Gold Experience Requiem, a stand that could bend reality itself, and he used it not for domination, but for protection. Gold Experience Requiem was a tool of change, not destruction. It was the force that allowed Giorno to rewrite the future, to shape the world in his image, to create the peace he so desperately sought. In the final showdown for control of Passione, Giorno faced his most formidable adversary, the leader of the organization, the man who had held the reins of power for so long. It was not a battle of violence, it was a battle of wills, of ideologies, of vision. Giorno knew that to defeat this man, he had to do more than simply overpower him. He had to break his hold on the organization, to show the other members of Passione that there was a better way. In the end, it was Giorno's vision that triumphed. He did not rely on brute force. He did not destroy his enemies. Instead, he created something new, something that had never existed before. He took control of Passione, not as a tyrant, but as a leader with a clear sense of purpose. His victory was not in the defeat of his enemies, but in the creation of a world where those who had once been his enemies could now work together for the greater good. Giorno Giovanna's rise to power was not just the story of a young man with a stand. It was the story of a man who believed in the possibility of change, of a world where kindness, compassion, and justice could guide the powerful. Through his quiet determination and unwavering belief in his vision, Giorno reshaped the mafia world, not with blood and violence, but with hope, integrity, and the unshakable conviction that a better future was always within reach. In the heart of every story, beneath the layers of conflict and ambition, there lies the quiet truth of sacrifice. Some heroes are born into greatness, their paths illuminated by light and hope. Others, however, are shaped by struggle, by choices they never wanted to make, by sacrifices they never anticipated. They walk not for glory or fame, but for something deeper, something more personal. The quiet whisper of love, loyalty, and the desire to protect. Bruno Bucciarati, the leader of the group that would eventually join Giorno in his mission, was one of these tragic heroes. His life, though outwardly marked by the harsh realities of the mafia world, was shaped by a quiet strength, one that was defined not by the power of his stand, sticky fingers, but by the integrity of his spirit. Bucciarati was not the kind of man who sought power for its own sake. He was a man who wanted peace, not for himself, but for those he cared for, and more importantly, for those who had no voice in the dark underworld in which he lived. But life in the mafia is never simple. It is a world built on lies, manipulation, and betrayal, where alliances shift like sand, and the only thing that truly matters is survival. And yet, even in the face of these harsh truths, Bucciarati remained steadfast. He carried with him a sense of duty, a belief that even in the darkest places, one could still act with honor. His past was filled with pain and loss, yet he never allowed it to break him. Instead, it shaped him into the leader he would become, the man who, despite the odds, fought to protect the innocent and the vulnerable. Bucciarati's loyalty to his comrades was unmatched. He saw in them not just fellow members of the mafia, but individuals with their own hopes, their own dreams, and their own fears. His bond with them was not forged in the heat of battle alone, but in the quiet moments between conflicts, when they shared a meal, a drink, or a simple word of comfort. It was in these moments that Bucciarati's true strength shone, a strength that came not from the power of his stand, but from his unwavering belief in the goodness of others, even in a world that seemed devoid of it. But as often happens in stories of heroes, tragedy lurked just beneath the surface. Bucciarati's commitment to his ideals would lead him down a path that would ultimately bring him into conflict with the very system he sought to change. His decision to join forces with Giorno to protect him from the dangerous forces within Passione was a choice that would cost him dearly. It was a decision made not out of ambition, but out of a sense of duty, duty to something greater than himself. In this, Bucciarati became a true tragic hero. His actions, though noble, were not without consequence. Throughout his journey, Bucciarati's strength was tested time and time again. He faced betrayals that cut deeper than any wound, fought enemies who were not simply opponents, but reflections of the darkness within himself. But it was through these trials that Bucciarati's true character emerged, not as a man of perfect strength, but as a man who, despite his flaws, remained true to his values. His journey was not one of unbroken triumph, but of quiet perseverance, of standing up for what was right, even when the cost was personal. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of Bucciarati's journey was the constant pull between his duty to the mafia and his sense of morality. He was a man trapped between two worlds, one that demanded loyalty to the ruthless underworld, and another that called for compassion, honor, and justice. It was a tension that never fully left him, and it weighed heavily on his heart. His stand, sticky fingers, with its ability to create zippers that could open or close any surface, reflected this duality, capable of both destruction and protection, of both creating and dismantling. Yet despite the burden of this conflict, Bucciarati never wavered in his commitment to his comrades. He took the weight of their struggles upon his own shoulders, always shielding them from harm, even at the cost of his own well-being. His bond with Giorno was especially significant, for it represented the embodiment of his ideals. Giorno, the young man who had risen from the ashes of his own difficult past, was the symbol of everything Bucciarati had hoped for: a new, better world, one free from the corruption and cruelty of the mafia. But even as Bucciarati fought to protect Giorno and the others, he could not escape the inevitable toll that the mafia exacted from its followers. His eventual fate, one marked by self-sacrifice, was a reminder of the heavy price paid by those who sought to change a broken system from within. It was not a death marked by violence or grandeur, but by quiet acceptance, a recognition that despite his best efforts, the world would continue to turn, and that his story, like so many others, would fade into the background. Yet even in the face of death, Bucciarati's spirit remained unbroken. His final moments, though filled with pain and loss, were also filled with peace. He knew that he had given everything he had for the cause he believed in, that he had done what he could to protect those he loved. And in that quiet acceptance, he achieved a form of redemption. He became a symbol of the quiet heroism that often goes unnoticed, the kind of hero whose strength lies not in their victories, but in their willingness to face impossible odds with a heart full of integrity. Bucciarati's death was a turning point, not just for his comrades, but for the entire story. It marked the end of an era for the group, the loss of a leader whose compassion had held them together. But it also marked the beginning of something new. Giorno, now fully realizing the weight of the world that lay upon his shoulders, stepped into his new role with the quiet wisdom that Bucciarati had instilled in him. The legacy of Bucciarati lived on, not in the battles fought, but in the hearts of those he had protected and inspired. In the world of stands, where reality and possibility often bend and twist in unexpected ways, it is easy to forget that every power, every gift, carries with it a cost. Behind every stand user, behind every battle, lies the quiet truth that nothing is ever truly free. Every victory is won with sacrifice, and every dream is pursued with the understanding that there will be moments of loss, of hardship that must be endured. But it is in these moments, when the cost of one's ideals becomes apparent, that the true strength of a person's spirit is revealed. For the Crusaders, each day in the fight against the mafia world and against the dark forces that had come to shape their lives had brought them closer to a profound understanding of this truth. Giorno Giovanna's dream of reshaping the mafia, of turning it into an organization that could protect rather than prey upon the weak, was noble, yet it came with its own tragedy. The path to his vision was not one of simple heroism. It was one forged in the fires of sacrifice, in the quiet moments of loss that echoed like shadows through the streets of Morio. The battle against Diavolo was not only a fight to free the world from the cruel grip of power, it was also a personal battle, one where each crusader had to confront their own fears, their own doubts, and their own inability to escape the harsh realities of the world around them. The closer they came to Diavolo's downfall, the more the group was forced to reckon with the inevitable end of their own journeys. But it was in these moments of vulnerability, when the dream seemed impossible, that the true strength of their bonds was revealed. Giorno, at the center of it all, had known the stakes from the beginning. He had always understood that his path would not be easy. The legacy of the Joestar family, the bloodline that had carried the weight of destiny and fate for generations, was not simply a gift, it was a burden. And yet, Giorno carried it with grace. He knew that to change the world, he had to first accept that change came not through idealism alone, but through the harsh realities of sacrifice. The group's first true taste of loss came when Bucciarati, the noble leader who had guided them through the darkest of times, fell in battle. His death was not a heroic one. It was not a blaze of glory, but a quiet, painful sacrifice, one that left a void in the group's heart. The loss of Bucciarati was a turning point, one that marked the beginning of a long and painful journey for Giorno and his companions. But it also served as a reminder of the cost of their dream. As they pressed on, chasing the remnants of Diavolo's power and his deadly stand, King Crimson, the group began to understand just how fragile their dream truly was. The closer they came to their goal, the more the stakes were raised. They were no longer just fighting for their own survival. They were fighting for a world that could be better, one where those who had been born into the darkness of the mafia could find redemption. But in the face of such a vast and cruel system, was it even possible to create a new world? Was it possible to change something that had been built on betrayal, power, and violence? The answer, of course, was both yes and no. Giorno's strength lay not in his ability to defeat Diavolo, but in his unwavering belief that change was possible. He knew that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, even in the shadow of tragedy, the dream could be realized. And yet, he also knew that the cost of this dream would be high, that the sacrifices made would be felt by every single one of them. His victory over Diavolo while a testament to his power and will, came at the price of everything they had worked for, the lives of those who had fought beside him, the friends who had been lost along the way. The group's battle against Diavolo was not just a battle for the future, it was a battle for their own humanity. It was a fight against the darkness that had crept into their hearts, the fear that they would become like the very enemies they sought to destroy. Giorno's victory in the end was not one of triumph over evil, but one of reconciliation. He had learned, like his ancestors before him, that change could not come from the destruction of the old, but from the rebirth of the new. The victory was not in the defeat of Diavolo, but in the creation of a future where people like him, like them, could rebuild and begin anew. Yet even as Giorno stood victorious, his heart was heavy. He had seen the price of his dream, and it weighed on him. His vision for the future, though realized in part, had come at the cost of so much. The loss of Bucciarati had left a mark that could never be erased. And though he had created a better world, it was not without scars. But it was in these scars that Giorno found the true meaning of his journey. The dream he had fought for, the dream that had driven him to rise above the limits of his past, was not just a personal ambition, it was a collective one. He understood now that the path to peace, to change, was not one of isolation. It was a journey that required the strength and support of others. In the final moments, as Giorno took his place as the leader of Pione, he understood that the true meaning of leadership was not in the power to command, but in the ability to inspire others to believe in the possibility of change. And in that quiet, bittersweet realization, he found peace, not the kind that came from victory, but the kind that came from knowing that he had done his best, that he had given everything for the dream of a better world. The world is a tapestry woven not just by the actions of those who lead, but by the quiet, everyday choices of those who follow. The true strength of any movement, any revolution, lies not in the power of the one at the top, but in the collective will of those who stand beside them. And in this moment, as Giorno Giovanna took his place as the new leader of Pione, it was not just his victory that marked the turning of the page. It was the promise of a new world, shaped by the loyalty, the courage, and the hope of those who had supported him throughout his journey. Pione had been a dark and corrupt force in the world, its leadership built on manipulation, fear, and cruelty. The organization had thrived on a foundation of broken lives, where power was maintained through bloodshed, deception, and treachery. But Giorno, with his unyielding vision and his gentle determination, had seen something more in the hearts of the people around him. He had seen the potential for change, for transformation, not through the destruction of the mafia, but through the reclamation of its power, through the restoration of honor and justice within its very core. As Giorno stood at the helm of the organization, he knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The wounds of the past could not simply be forgotten. The scars of betrayal, of violence, and of manipulation were deeply ingrained in the very fabric of the mafia's structure. But Giorno had never been one to shy away from a challenge. He understood that true change did not come in grand gestures. It came in the quiet, steady work of rebuilding, of showing those who had been broken that they could stand again. The weight of leadership was not lost on Giorno. He had seen the toll it took on those who came before him, the burden that came with power. He had watched as his allies, Bruno Bucciarati, Abbacchio, Fugo, faced their own battles, both internal and external. And he had seen how even the noblest of souls could be crushed by the weight of the world. But Giorno also knew that leadership was not about wielding power for its own sake. It was about inspiring others to believe in something greater than themselves. It was about creating a future where hope could flourish, where the scars of the past could be healed. In the weeks and months that followed his ascent, Giorno worked tirelessly to reshape Passione. The organization was no longer about blind loyalty or ruthless ambition. It became a force for good, a means of protecting the vulnerable and giving strength to those who had been cast aside by society. Giorno's vision was clear: to create a world where the powerful did not dominate the weak, but where the powerful used their strength to protect those who could not protect themselves. It was a vision that would not be realized overnight, but it was a vision that began with a single, unwavering commitment to justice. And yet, even as Giorno worked to reshape the mafia, he never lost sight of the people who had helped him along the way. The Crusaders, who had stood by his side through thick and thin, remained his greatest allies. Josuke, Kakyoin, Polnareff, and the others had become more than just companions. They had become his family. Together, they had faced countless challenges, overcome unimaginable obstacles, and fought side by side to protect the future. For Giorno, the legacy of the Joestar family was not just about bloodlines or powers. It was about the quiet strength of those who chose to stand together. The Joestars had always been defined by their ability to endure, to rise above the darkness, and to protect the world with compassion and conviction. And as Giorno took his place at the helm of Passione, he carried that legacy with him, knowing that the true power of the family was not in their individual abilities, but in their shared belief in something greater than themselves. Yet even as Giorno embraced his role as the new leader, the shadows of the past still loomed large. Kira's influence, though removed, had left its mark on the town, and there were those who still clung to the old ways of the mafia, refusing to let go of the power that had once been theirs. Giorno understood that there would always be resistance, that there would always be those who sought to maintain the status quo. But he was not afraid of resistance. He knew that true change was never easy. It was always met with opposition, with fear, and with doubt. But it was through these struggles that a better world would be built. And so, Giorno continued to lead with quiet resolve, never losing sight of his vision for a better future. He worked tirelessly to strengthen Passione from within, to root out the corruption that had once defined it, and to build a new foundation based on loyalty, justice, and compassion. His leadership was not defined by his power, but by his ability to inspire others to rise to the occasion, to believe in the possibility of change, and to fight for a world where the powerful used their strength to protect rather than oppress. As the months passed, Giorno's efforts began to bear fruit. The influence of Passione began to shift, and slowly but surely, the organization became a force for good in the world. People who had once feared the mafia began to see it in a new light, no longer as a symbol of terror, but as a symbol of hope. The dream that Giorno had fought for, that he had bled for, was beginning to take shape. It was not a perfect world, and it would never be, but it was a world that was moving in the right direction, a world where the dream of a better future was no longer just a dream, but a reality. In the end, Giorno's legacy was not one of conquest or domination. It was one of transformation, a quiet, powerful force that reshaped the world not with violence, but with vision. He had proven that even in the darkest of times, a single person could make a difference, that the power to change the world lay not in the strength of one, but in the strength of many working together side by side to create a future where kindness, justice, and hope could flourish. There are moments in every story, every journey, where the dust settles and the air grows still. The battle is over. The enemy has fallen. The world, once on the brink of chaos, slowly begins to breathe again. And in this quiet aftermath, the true work begins, not of fighting, not of conquering, but of rebuilding. Morio, the once peaceful town that had unknowingly borne witness to so many dark and dangerous forces, now found itself in the midst of a new beginning. The shadows that had loomed over the town for so long, the influence of Dio, the corruption of Passione, and the terrifying rise of Kira had all receded. But what remained was not simply a world freed from danger. It was a world that needed to heal, to grow, to rebuild from the broken pieces left behind. For Giorno Giovanna, the process of rebuilding was never just about restoring the physical world. It was about restoring the hearts of those who had been touched by the darkness, the people who had lived under the weight of fear and manipulation for so long. The battle for Passione, for the soul of the mafia, had been won, but the war to create a better world was only just beginning. Giorno had claimed his victory, taking control of Passione with the goal of turning it into an organization that would protect rather than harm. His vision was clear, yet he knew that the road ahead would not be easy. For while the victory over Diavolo had brought a sense of peace, the true test would come in the quiet moments after. It was not the battles fought in the streets that defined the future. It was the moments of everyday life, the actions taken by those who would shape the future, that would determine whether this new era would thrive or falter. The streets of Morio, once filled with fear, now held a different kind of energy, a slow, quiet pulse that carried with it the promise of something better. Josuke, Kakyoin, Polnareff, and the others had remained by Giorno's side, each of them finding their own place in this new world. For some, it was a return to normalcy, finding peace in the quiet rhythms of their daily lives. For others, it was the beginning of a new purpose. Koichi, who had once been unsure of his place in the world, now found himself standing beside Giorno, a quiet but steadfast ally in the rebuilding of the town. His stand, Echoes, had grown not just in power, but in wisdom. The once timid boy had become a young man with a heart full of compassion, ready to help rebuild a broken world. Okuyasu, too, had found his place in the new world. The impulsive, fiery spirit that had once driven him to act without thought was now tempered by the quiet wisdom he had gained through his friendship with Josuke and the battles they had fought together. Okuyasu's stand, the hand, had once been a symbol of destruction, but now, in the hands of its user, it became a tool for restoration. Where once he had destroyed with reckless abandon, now he learned to create, to build, to help mend what had been torn apart. But even as the town began to heal, there were still remnants of the old world that clung to the edges. The mafia's influence did not vanish overnight, And while Giorno had taken control of Passione, there were still those who sought to undermine him, to return to the old ways of power and manipulation. The streets of Morio were not completely free from danger, not yet. But the difference now was that the people of the town, those who had once been silenced, now had a voice. They had the power to fight back, to stand up for what they believed in, and to rebuild their world in the image of a brighter future. For Giorno, the work ahead was not simply about rooting out the remnants of the old world. It was about creating something new, something that could never be undone. The foundation of his leadership was built on the lessons he had learned from his ancestors, from those who had fought before him to protect the innocent and the helpless. He had inherited not just the legacy of Jonathan Joestar, but the quiet strength of the Joestar family, their ability to endure, to rise above the darkness, and to create something better. But even as Giorno worked to build the future, he never lost sight of the sacrifices that had been made. He remembered Bucciarati, the brave leader who had fought alongside him and who had paid the ultimate price for his loyalty and his ideals. He remembered the friends they had lost, those who had fallen in battle, those whose names were whispered only in the hearts of those who loved them. And in these quiet moments of remembrance, Giorno understood that the work of rebuilding was not just about creating a new world. It was about honoring those who had come before and ensuring that their sacrifices had not been in vain. Morio, now under the careful watch of Giorno and his allies, began to thrive once more. The once broken streets, once filled with the echoes of crime and violence, now held the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The shops were open again. The laughter of children echoed through the streets once more. People began to rebuild their lives, and slowly but surely the town healed. Yet even in the face of all the progress, Giorno knew that peace would never be fully secured. There would always be shadows, always be those who sought to disrupt the delicate balance they had fought so hard to create. But Giorno's conviction just never wavered. He understood that peace was not a destination, it was a journey that required constant effort, constant vigilance, and the willingness to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And so, with the streets of Morio once again filled with light, Giorno and his friends continued forward. Not as conquerors, but as stewards of a new world. They had learned, through their trials and sacrifices, that true peace was not built on the eliminations of all conflict, but on the strength to endure, to heal, and to rebuild together. In the end, it was not the grand victories that defined them. It was the quiet moments of hope that arose from the rubble, the small acts of kindness, of sacrifice, of love. It was these moments that would shape the future, that would carry the legacy of the Joestars forward into a new era, an era where peace, though fragile, was always worth fighting for. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows over the town of Morio, the streets hummed with a quiet energy. The whispers of the past, of battles fought and lost, of heroes who had sacrificed everything, seemed to linger in the air like a distant memory. Yet in this moment of peace, there was also a sense of quiet uncertainty. For Giorno Giovanna, though the Mafia had been reshaped under his leadership, the true burden of his role had only just begun. Giorno's dream was clear: to reshape Passione, to transform the very core of the Mafia into an organization that would protect the innocent rather than exploit them. But the weight of this ambition was heavy, a constant presence at the back of his mind. He had become the leader of an organization built on betrayal and corruption, and even with the power of Gold Experience Requiem, even with the unwavering support of his allies, Giorno knew that the task ahead was far from simple. Leadership, he had come to understand, was not just about making decisions or wielding power. It was about responsibility. It was about guiding others through difficult times, making choices that would affect not just the present, but the future. Giorno had never sought power for its own sake, but in taking control of Pione, he had inherited a world filled with complex, conflicting forces. Every move he made was scrutinized. Every decision weighed against the heavy cost of the future he hoped to create. The Mafia, with all its darkness, had shaped the lives of so many, and Giorno knew that no amount of goodwill or idealism could erase the years of suffering that had come before. But he had also learned that true leadership was not about erasing the past. It was about confronting it, understanding it, and using it to build a better future. To change the world, Giorno had to understand its flaws and its brokenness, and then work to heal those wounds. His stand, Gold Experience Requiem, reflected this deep understanding of the human condition. It was not a stand of simple destruction. It was a stand that could restore, that could create new possibilities, that could reshape reality itself. In the hands of a man like Giorno, Gold Experience Requiem was more than just a weapon. It was a tool for healing, a means of building something new from the ashes of the past. But even with the power to bend reality, Giorno felt the weight of the choices he had to make. Every day brought new challenges, new decisions that would shape the course of his leadership. The men and women who had followed him, the allies he had gained along the way, looked to him for guidance, for direction, and with each passing day, the burden of leadership grew heavier. But Giorno had never been one to shy away from responsibility. He knew that to create the world he dreamed of, he had to take the weight of it all upon his shoulders, and he would carry it as long as it meant a better future for those he cared about. There were moments in the quiet of the night when Giorno would sit alone in his office, staring out at the city that he had come to call home. In those moments, the weight of his leaderships felt unbearable. The past would surface in his thoughts, the sacrifices of those who had stood by him, the friends he had lost along the way. He would think of Bucciarati, the noble leader whose life had been cut short, and of the others who had given everything in the fight to change the mafia world. They had all believed in him, had believed in the dream of a better world, and Giorno could not, would not, let their sacrifices be in vain. But it was not only the past that weighed on him, it was the future. The world he had inherited was still fractured, still full of shadows that had not yet been chased away. The mafia had been rebuilt, but the remnants of its old self still lingered. There were those who sought to exploit the power he had claimed, those who would try to manipulate or control him for their own gain. Giorno had seen the depths of human greed, the lengths to which people would go to maintain their power, and though he had the strength to resist, the strength to lead, he knew that the fight was far from over. In the early days of his reign, Giorno had believed that once the battle for control was won, peace would naturally follow. But the truth was more complicated than he had anticipated. Peace was not something that could be imposed. It was something that had to be nurtured, slowly and steadily, like a fragile flower in a storm. And as the leader of Passione, Giorno had to cultivate that peace, even when the world around him seemed intent on tearing it apart. The people who had once lived under the oppressive rule of the mafia, the victims of its cruelty and corruption, now looked to him for a future. They wanted to believe that the world could be different, that the violence and fear that had defined their lives could be replaced with something better. But Giorno knew that rebuilding trust would take time, that the scars left by years of violence could not be healed overnight. He would have to prove every day that the world he had promised them was not a fantasy, that it was real, and that it was worth fighting for. And yet, even in the face of these challenges, Giorno never wavered in his resolve. He understood that leadership was not about easy victories. It was about perseverance. It was about showing up every day, despite the weight of the world on your shoulders, and doing what needed to be done. It was about making the hard decisions, the ones that might not be popular, but that were necessary for the greater good. As Giorno stood at the helm of Passione, he knew that the road ahead would be long, that the future would be full of challenges. But he also knew that with the support of his friends, his allies, and his unwavering belief in the possibility of change, he could lead them toward a better tomorrow. The dream of a world where the mafia was no longer a force of terror, but a force of protection, was within his grasp. And with each passing day, he would move closer to making that dream a reality. Even as the world around him began to shift, Giorno Giovanna found that the path he had chosen was far from simple. Leadership, though a title he had claimed with determination, was not a static thing. It was not something that could be grasped and held without continuous effort, without constant vigilance. The dream of a better world, one free from the darkness that had plagued the mafia for so long, was still alive in his heart, but it required more than hope. It required action. It required a depth of resolve that only those who had truly known the weight of leadership could understand. Morio, once a quiet town, now found itself at the crossroads of change. The power of Passion had been reshaped under Giorno's rule, and the once overbearing grip of the mafia had loosened. But change, true change, was never easy. It was always met with resistance, with fear, with doubt. The world was not ready to accept the new reality he was trying to build, and Giorno had known this from the start. He had known that the old ways would not simply fade away. They would fight back. They would try to regain control, and they would not do so through brute force alone. The remnants of the mafia's old leadership were still scattered throughout the world, like seeds of a poisoned plant, ready to sprout again if given the chance. While Giorno had successfully taken the reins of Passione, his enemies had not disappeared into the shadows. They had retreated, yes, but only to regroup, to wait for a moment when they could strike again. Giorno understood that the fight was not over, and that every victory was only a temporary reprieve before the next challenge arose. It was a reality that weighed heavily on Giorno's mind. Even as he worked to reform Passione, to turn it into a force for good, he could not afford to forget that the dark forces of the mafia still lurked in the background. He had made enemies, powerful enemies, who would stop at nothing to undermine his efforts. Giorno knew that his dream of peace would only become a reality if he could hold on to this fragile new order, if he could protect it from those who sought to drag it back into the darkness. But the weight of leadership was not the only burden Giorno carried. He had come to realize that the expectations of his friends, his allies, and the people he sought to protect were just as heavy. His companions, those who had fought beside him through the most difficult of trials, trusted him. They believed in him, and that belief was not something he could take lightly. They looked to him for guidance, for direction, for reassurance that the path they had chosen was the right one. Josuke, Polnareff, Kakyoin, and Okuyasu had all become more than allies. They had become his family. Their support was unwavering, and their presence gave him strength when his resolve faltered. Yet even with their loyalty and determination, Giorno knew that he could not carry the burden of leadership alone. He needed them, just as they needed him. Their shared experiences had forged bonds that went beyond friendship. They were united by a common goal, by a shared vision of a better world. But Giorno also understood that the world was not as simple as that. Leadership required more than the support of friends. It required the willingness to make difficult decisions, to face harsh truths, and to confront the parts of himself that were still uncertain. His path had not been easy, and he knew that the hardest moments were still ahead of him. As he worked to stabilize Pione, Giorno found himself constantly challenged by the lingering effects of the Mafia's grip on the world. Old habits died hard, and many of those who had once thrived in the shadows of power were reluctant to let go of their influence. The Mafia had shaped their lives, had molded their identities, and they were not easily swayed. Giorno had to be patient to show them that change was possible, but he also had to be firm, to make it clear that the old ways had no place in this new world. And so, Giorno continued his work with quiet determination. His leadership was not defined by grand speeches or dramatic gestures. It was defined by the subtle actions that showed the world what he truly stood for. He was not a leader who sought to dominate or control. He was a leader who sought to inspire, to guide others toward a future where kindness, compassion, and justice would reign. He knew that this was not a dream that could be realized in a single moment. It was a vision that would take years, even decades, to fully come to fruition. In the meantime, Giorno continued to work tirelessly to rebuild the foundations of Pione, to remove the corruption that still lingered, and to ensure that the new leadership was based on trust and mutual respect. The town of Morio, too, began to heal. The people, once fearful of the Mafia's power, now saw that change was possible. They began to trust in the future Giorno was creating, and that trust was a powerful force in itself. But the battle for peace was not over. There were still those who clung to the old ways, still those who would try to undermine the progress they had made. Giorno knew that the true test of his leadership had yet to come. The forces of darkness that had once ruled Pione would not give up easily, and the future of the world would not be shaped by Giorno alone. It would be shaped by the collective will of those who stood with him, those who had fought beside him, and those who had yet to believe that a better world was possible. And so, Giorno pressed on, resolute in his belief that the dream was worth fighting for. The road ahead was long, but he would walk it with the same quiet strength that had carried him this far. The world was changing, slowly but surely, and with each step, Giorno knew that he was moving closer to the future he had always dreamed of. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the streets of Morio, casting a soft, golden glow across the town that had, over time, come to reflect the very ideals Giorno Giovanna had worked so hard to bring to life. It was not the vibrant glow of an immediate victory, nor the radiant shine of triumph after battle. It was the gentle, steady light of a world slowly beginning to heal, a world built on trust, compassion, and the quiet strength of those who had fought to protect it. Giorno stood at the window of his office, gazing out at the town below, a town that had once been a battleground of shadows and violence, but was now filled with promise. His journey had been long, fraught with hardship, loss, and the constant pull between the world he sought to create and the darkness he had inherited. Yet despite it all, Giorno remained unwavering in his belief that peace was possible, if only people had the courage to pursue it and the strength to fight for it. As the new leader of Pione, Giorno had already made significant strides in reshaping the organization. No longer was it a symbol of terror and exploitation. It had become something far greater, a force for good, a protector of the weak, a provider of justice in a world that had often been blind to it. Giorno had taken the mantle of leadership not for the sake of power, but for the sake of the people he had sworn to protect. His victory over Diavolo and the corruption that had plagued Pione was only the beginning of a much longer journey. But the true challenge lay ahead, maintaining the balance he had worked so hard to establish. Power, even when wielded with the best of intentions, was a fragile thing. Giorno understood that the future of Pione was not something he could control alone. It was something that needed to be built with the support of those around him, his allies, his friends, and the very people who had once feared the organization. As Giorno looked out at the morning sky, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. The people who had stood by him, those who had believed in his dream, had all played their part in shaping the future. Josuke, Kakyoin, Polnareff, Okuyasu, each of them had contributed to the creation of a new world, a world where the mafia no longer held the power to destroy lives, but instead had become a force for change, for healing, for protection. Their support, their courage, their belief in him had given Giorno the strength to continue, to press on, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. Yet even as he stood in this moment of reflection, Giorno knew that the future would not be without its challenges. The road to peace was never straight. It was a winding path, filled with obstacles, with forces both internal and external that would seek to undermine the vision he had worked so hard to build. But Giorno was no longer the unsure young man who had first set foot in the mafia world. He was a leader, one who had learned from his mistakes, who had understood the depths of human nature, and who had come to realize that true leadership was not about wielding power over others, but about inspiring them to rise to their best selves. The foundations of Pione had been rebuilt, but it was now time to ensure that those foundations were solid. Giorno had already begun to reshape the organization from the inside, removing the corruption and the ruthless individuals who had once thrived in the shadows. But the real work was in the small details, the daily actions, the choices made in moments of uncertainty, the trust that had to be earned every single day. Giorno had built his leadership not through force or manipulation, but through the belief that people could be trusted, that they could rise above their fears and embrace a better future. But that trust had to be continuously nurtured, just as the world they had fought for had to be constantly protected. And so, Giorno knew that the battle for the future was not over. It was a constant struggle, a fight that required patience, understanding, and the unwavering belief that even in a world filled with darkness, there could always be light. Passione would not change overnight. The scars of its past would take time to heal. But Giorno had faith in his friends, in the people he led, and in the dream that they had all fought for. As Giorno walked through the halls of the newly reformed Passione headquarters, he saw the faces of those who had come to trust him. The members of the organization, once hardened by years of corruption, now looked to him not as a leader who wielded power, but as a leader who inspired change. And though the path ahead remained uncertain, there was a quiet sense of hope that filled the room, a sense that together they could create something better, something lasting. The people of Morio, too, began to feel the effects of the change. They had lived in fear for so long, unsure of what the future held. But now, as they saw the mafia transforming before their eyes, they began to believe in the possibility of a world where they could live in peace, without fear of violence or betrayal. Giorno had shown them that even in the most broken systems, there was always the possibility for redemption. It was a lesson they had learned through his actions, not his words. As the days passed, the town of Morio began to flourish once more. The people, once scarred by the mafia's grip, now found themselves working alongside the organization to build a future that would be brighter than they had ever imagined. Giorno had given them hope, and in return, they had given him the strength to keep moving forward. And so, as the town blossomed under the steady leadership of Giorno, he understood that the dream he had fought for was not just his own. It was a dream that belonged to all those who had believed in him, who had stood by his side, and who had sacrificed so much to bring this world into being. The future of Passione and of the world they had built together was now in their hands. As Giorno stood in the center of this new world, he knew that he had not simply inherited the legacy of his ancestors. He had forged a new legacy, one that was shaped not by bloodlines or power, but by the hearts of those who had chosen to fight for something greater than themselves. Thank you for journeying with us through the story of Giorno Giovanna and the rebirth of Passione. As we conclude this tale, may you carry with you the quiet lessons of hope, perseverance, and the belief that even in the darkest of worlds, the light of change can always find its way through. May the peace that emerged from the struggle continue to resonate with you, and may you always remember that no dream, no matter how difficult, is ever beyond reach. Good night.